Who got removed?
Oh, I was doing the counting in my head. I think Mr. Peterson just pulled it. So I got 1 minute.
He probably thought river. I caught it at like the exact right time.
Okay.
And then I was cursing as I was turning. I was like, why did I go
To the transportation work session.
I can go Maidens or river, and I was like, why did I go river?
No, I've been taking 64 to work every day down Fair Road instead of like the nice scenic Route 6.
All right, you guys ready? All right. I used to have that in this room. Welcome everybody to our 1 p.m. Work session where we'll be discussing transportation. So just so folks in the audience are aware, we had to move we had a transportation work scheduled for this morning, had to be moved this afternoon combined with this meeting. So the first probably hour and 15 minutes of this meeting, we'll be talking about transportation related items, and then we'll move into the CIP. So if you were here for the CIP stuff and you would like to step out because, you know, it's roads, feel free to do so. We will not be offended. So I'll give everybody a chance, and we'll all look the other way, away from the doors, so we won't see who sneaks out. All right. If not, we will go ahead and move forward. We have an incredibly full agenda today. We do have a quorum. I'm guessing Mr. Peterson is maybe stuck on Route 6, but we can go ahead and move forward for the sake of time. Would you like to put us forward?
Okay, that sounds good. So yeah, this is a transportation workshop kind of tying in the CIP narrative as far as transportation priority moving forward. The original agenda for this morning's presentation was a little bit longer. In the sake of time, I won't touch on. They're included in copies of the presentation, but some current efforts the staff's undertaking, as well as the smart scale results from the round of state funding. We had 4 applications. We were successful with getting 1 of them fully funded. But really the bulk of the presentation is what's bolded up there that I want to focus today on to make sure we get to that part is the transportation CIP overview framework for small projects, and then the workshop form moving forward. And then ideally, if we have time at the end, I want to do a quick follow-up on the Fairland Road study and kind of a follow-up on the ways to utilize.
It's awesome. Let me just hop in there.
Yeah.
Kind of. So we started doing these we do a little more frequently now as the funding sources have become more available, as we have a transportation director that can actually pull these workshops together. And it's a great opportunity for us as the board and citizens observing to see where we are focusing, challenges that we have, how difficult all the funding sources options are, how you have to sort of navigate this. There's an art and a science to it, which we're really growing into doing really well. So thank you and your, I guess your team of 1-ish, Colin and friends. But we appreciate that and look forward to this session today.
All right, so the transportation CIP overview. Our December workshop reviewed funding sources for various transportation projects. The goal of the next set of slides is to really review the projects that were listed, plus additional projects, but the ones that were listed in the 2035 CIP from a few years ago as far as eligibility for the various funding sources, review some recommended priorities, and kind of the overarching theme of the CIP overview is that the funding priorities need to be flexible and it should be flexible because priorities are changing. Action over DDI was a county priority and has been for some time, but with Project Rocky and the developmental growth we're seeing along the Action River corridor, it became priority number 1 overnight. So things like that, we need to be able to continue to shift our focus to different parts of the county as we see development. So we really want to make sure we stay flexible. So we're going to look at a couple things, like I mentioned a minute ago, the CIP eligibility. It's going to kind of lead us into a proposed Goochland application plan. It's thoughts for the next 3 or so years about what projects should go into the various funding pots for applications. And we'll talk about what I'm dubbing the Goochland Local 6-Year Plan as a way to track local dollars, CBTA or general fund dollars, and coordination with some of those applications, or also as part of some of the small projects, which we'll touch on later. And some of the sources that we're looking at with this is federal sources through the IIJA, and then state and regional sources. One thing you'll note on the chart in just in a few slides is we don't show eligibility for the federal sources, in that the federal grant opportunities are very much a one-off opportunity. They continue to pop up out of the woodwork. Any and all projects are in theory eligible for the IIJA, so staff's always pursuing those opportunities as a one-off, kind of outside of the proposed application plan, which I'll touch on. Methodology that staff took for determining the priorities once we get through the eligibility is reviewing the original transportation CIP versus current development pressures. So do the old priorities match with what's currently needed in the county? Reviewing growth patterns in the county. Where are the areas that we're seeing the projects come in? The east end of the county for sure, but we're obviously seeing a lot of growth along the fairground corridor and in the courthouse area. Undertook a review of the recent studies and traffic impact analyses, submittals with various rezoning projects, but then also looking at the Route 250 STAR study and the Route 288 STAR study, which are studies that VDOT undertook for 250 and 288 in the Goochland and Henrico corridor. And then also taking a look at the Fairground Road corridor study that was just underway and received by the board on the 7th. Also looked at the arterial management plan and major thoroughfare plan that were done in 2015 and 2018 respectively, to kind of understand the scope of various projects and how those priorities from those plans align with the development pressures that we're seeing. And a key determination is we selected projects based on not only the criteria listed above and where they came from, but what it's actually eligible for. So the project may be 5th as far as total priority, but it's the only one eligible for a certain pot. Obviously, that's going to be the first one, and it may look like it's jumping the line, but it's not, because it's the only one eligible for that particular source of money.
So could you just, if you don't
Absolutely.
mind, Mr. Chair, just real quick?
Yeah, I was gonna actually say, thank you for that. I didn't set this up, this is a workshop, so you don't have to go through the chair. This is for a chance for us to get together, and it's really a working session, so it should be interactive.
Free for all.
Okay, Austin,
Free for all.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
method for determining priorities. For me, something missing, and maybe it's embedded, and it's there, but I just don't see it, is public safety. What I see is development, traffic moving, arterial management. What I don't see is, one of our priorities should be public safety. So for instance, the sheriff's department keeps a list of all the traffic incidents and the most dangerous intersections in the county, and there's a top 20 or 30, and we should at least keep in mind addressing some of those glaring situations where there's a public safety issue. Maybe it's not development pressures, maybe it's not traffic's not moving, maybe it's people or property damaged for life and
I think
so,
to a certain extent, it is baked into this a little bit, where some of the areas that we see needs happen to coincide with some of the high incident areas. Specifically, there was an email that I went around about the Hermitage Mannequin intersection. It's on, and it was right before you stepped into the room.
Sure, go on.
What
I think
you just, I'm sorry, the words you just used is there maybe happen to be a correlation or coincidental. I'd like it to be a conscious.
Okay.
That's all.
I think what Mr. Reader is saying, when we talk about this, we talk about how our methodology is moving forward. We want to ensure that one of the first bullets is public safety is taken into account. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
That would include fire rescue response time, bridges and things like that. They're in as well.
That's public safety as well. Yeah.
Right.
If they have to go around a bridge because it's not qualified for weight. So I think that ought to be a conscious, deliberate, as opposed to, we think it's in there somewhere, kind of thing.
Okay. So first graphic I'll show you is CIP eligibility. So this is a quick run through, again, not of the federal source, the IIJA, but the state and regional sources that we have available to us. The list that's on the left-hand side is not only projects from the 2035 CIP, but it's also projects that have come out of recent studies. And to the point about fire rescue response, the Whitehall Bridge replacement is one that was made an immediate priority because VDOT has now deemed that to be structurally deficient, so it's eligible for state funds. So that's one specifically speaking to the public safety aspect that, again, it was kind of baked in, and it was conscious in my mind, but obviously it wasn't conscious on the presentation.
Yeah.
So this is just a quick overview of the eligibility. As a whole, a lot of our projects are eligible for a lot of pots of money, which is exactly where we want to be. And this does incorporate some of the CBTA changes that we're hoping to see finalized at the full authority meeting very shortly, as far as the additional guidelines for other projects. So we're very fortunate in that a lot of our projects are eligible for quite a few pots of money. With,
Can I ask a
yes.
question?
Yeah, I got a question too.
Okay.
On this, I see everything CBTA is checked, I get it, because we have, if what you just said happens, if it gets approved, then there's gonna be one, we can submit one
Correct.
each fiscal year. Is that
Correct,
right?
correct.
One that just, do any of those projects get under the CBTA check mark because it's quote regional?
No project that we have, other than those on Route 288, meet the current CBTA guidelines of 20,000 vehicles per day, or the 64 interchanges do because they're corridor statewide significance, and things on Route 250. Other than that, we don't have any road in the county that hits 20,000 vehicles per day, except Broad Street at the county line and Route 6 at the county line.
So it's important to understand, there's a bunch of options in 388, but maybe except for that, no, the Route 380 Bridge Street Shop, that's not, the third one on there, that's not eligible as regional, is it? The Route 288.
That would be eligible under the caveat, under the new criteria, as the ineligible project.
Well, then, well, the point is, of all those things, we have to pick one.
Correct.
Okay.
So what might be helpful is if we had CBTA local funds, CBTA regional, and even if we don't have anything regional, that shows us like, wow, there's not a lot of opportunity for us regional.
Well, and the intent with all the checks on CBTA is that with the guidelines potentially changing,
Right.
using the proposed guidelines that are going to be before the full authority, everything is eligible under the new guidelines, because we'll have the current guidelines are going to remain in place, and then we're going to have other project. Essentially, the only rule will be it's within your county.
Okay.
So there's going to be, every county will get at minimum one project to submit, which inherently makes all of our projects eligible.
So this just leads to another question, that new criteria is gonna be important, and I think that's a good compromise, at least, without changing the definition of regional or really getting into a complex formula that's probably unworkable. These things, we have to pick one, put it on the CBT list, but it's gonna get scored relative to, they still get
Correct,
scored.
Correct.
So-
It'll still be scored in the same methodology.
So we have to pick something that,
And it's using that application slot intentionally and putting a lot of thought into which one makes the most sense for the first round, second round, third round. It's finding that priority project to slide into that
and it competes with other
with the other regional.
jurisdictions'
Correct,
projects.
Correct. It will compete with the same pool of projects that it would otherwise if it were normally eligible.
Do you want to get crushed because of traffic counts?
The thought at TAC is, generally speaking, those projects will be able to lower cost because they're more of the rural projects, small intersection type projects. So the lower cost, it's a benefit cost analysis, just like Smart Scale. Your benefit may be a little lower, but your cost may be 10 times less. Therefore, your benefit cost will be very competitive.
Okay. Well, this is interesting.
Okay, Austin.
Yes.
So is there any methodology to the order of these?
This is just as they were listed on the old
Okay.
CIP. This is not in any order of priority.
Okay, that's what I thought. And so any projects we may have that we cannot identify funding for would not be on this list.
Correct.
So other bridges.
So for example, the
that are
Riddles Bridge
failing.
culvert replacement is not on this list because there's currently not any identified pot of money for that project.
So how do we identify, because we have other bridges that our fire rescue vehicles cannot
Right,
travel over,
right.
and they have to go all the way around.
Right.
So how are we addressing those?
So currently, the path that we're taking with them are they need to hit the checkbox of being structurally deficient in order to be eligible for the SGR funds. We have 5 total weight limit bridges in the county. 3 of them dramatically impact fire response times. Of the 3, Whitehall is the only one that's currently eligible for the state pot. As it stands today, the only other avenue to fund the reconstruction of the other 2 would be local dollars, whether it be CBTA local or general fund.
But that's not really answering my question.
Well, can I jump on that? Because that kind of goes contrary to what I was thinking before.
Okay.
Because all of our projects should are eligible for CBTA local funds.
Correct.
So that's why I do think maybe calling out CBTA local versus, knowing the, show the ones that are only available local. That way, we know they're all the things that we believe are accounted for are accounted for.
Okay.
Does that help, Susan?
Well, yes, I mean, even if we cannot, okay, even if we cannot identify, they're not structurally deficient or
Mhm.
whatever the term is, even if we can't identify a fund source, it's still a need.
Correct, it's still a need, it's just not current, the six funding sources up top.
I understand, but so I guess my question is, so we just don't do anything with them?
They're very much a need, it's being able to balance those needs versus the congestion needs we have in the county.
No, I get it, I'm not saying that they
Right.
necessarily, I'm not saying the priority. All I'm saying is, why are we not listing them? Maybe there's no funding source at this point.
Okay.
This is what I'm suggesting, because people need to keep their eyes on this, absolutely impacts our citizens.
But I think to your question, there's a funding source for any of them, because we have local dollars. Do we ever see ourselves being able to fully fund a project with local dollars?
We're doing Bulldog Way.
Okay, so small, very small.
Yeah,
projects.
right, so I think to your point,
Just open the door.
yeah, I think this is presentational only from hey, try to explain the funding sources. I do believe, though, as we move forward from a working perspective,
Absolutely,
having
and
a
it
full
may have
list.
been
That's fine.
beneficial to have an expanded list, and if there's some 5 projects that have no eligibility, then it maybe made sense to show
Well,
those at 5 or so.
We would have to put, like Mr. Runka said, in the CIP or something else, we'd have to fund. We know it's important, we gotta find different ways to fund it.
So the,
Bake sales,
if they're,
shared sales.
if they're not on the slide, it certainly doesn't mean that they're not county priorities. That's not the intent as far as what this is showing. They're not forgotten. It's just they're not eligible, and that was the intent behind this, it's just eligible projects.
And I
So
get it.
apologies for the
I
confusion.
see what you're doing, I just want to be sure we're not.
No, absolutely not.
It's
Those
gonna
are
get worse and
projects.
worse.
And Riddles Bridge is a project that's very much a priority, and along with the other 2 Wayland bridges.
Right. Okay, cool, thank you.
And also, it looks like this list has incorporated the Fairgrounds Road study.
Correct.
And then the Tuckahoe Parkway, High-Pitch Harmony is the 4th or 5th one down, just above the double line there. Yeah, that one, what is that project? Because they just repaved and relined and did that road.
So looking back at the CIP description, it's a shoulder widening, in some places lane widening, so adding from 2 lanes to 4 lanes in certain areas for Tuckahoe Creek Parkway.
Because they just paved that stretch.
Yeah,
High-Pitch to Harmony.
this list doesn't take into account when VDOT may have come back with maintenance paving and things like that.
I don't want to get too that far down the weeds. This is helpful to see the potential funding sources. At some point, reorganization of these by, the $100 million ones are just wish list, and the ones for 100,000, we can actually pull the trigger on, just some reality check, and that's part of it. And then also, if you can do maybe one with asterisk or in red that are public safety in nature as opposed to just, there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. I get it, this is the scatter plot, it says, here's the funding and here's all the projects, which is perfect. Later on, we can look at it from a different lens. but
Absolutely.
That's fine, thank you.
So with this eligibility, staff created a proposed application plan looking at the next 3 years. So this is 2023, 2024, 2025. Again, keeping in mind that every year there's different pots of money that's available. Smart Scale's every other year. CBTA is now going to every other year. So that's why you may not see certain funding pots in certain years. So this is staff's current proposed priority list, if you will, for the next 3 years for application slots. Obviously, I'm not expecting there to be potential changes come out of the workshops like right this second, but I wanted to get in front of the board. Anything that pops out immediately, just wanted to have an open discussion about it, and I'm willing to talk about any project on here as far as why.
Let's start someplace.
So we probably should talk about the Fairground Road study and what we want to do. I know you got some Fairground Road stuff in here.
That's at the end of the
So
session.
how do you have 2 fairground, are you, Fairground Road Maintenance and Hawktown, you have them in the same year with TPO? How's that possible? With new criteria, it's just going to be, because they don't meet regional, do they?
So the TPO doesn't follow the same definition as CBTA. TPO's got a few more eligible roadways than CBTA does. They have to be on arterials and collectors.
Okay,
So those projects are eligible for TPO, not traditionally CBTA, but the new CBTA one-off
okay.
is why the roundabout is here. So the thought with the roundabout project is not knowing the cost today of what the project may be, because I know the planning level cost estimate in the Fairground Corridor study, I'll say it's not accurate, because I know the roundabout right here was 6.5 million. They were saying the roundabout would be 3.5 million. I just know that that's not an accurate cost. So assuming it's 6 to 7 million, if it's not fully funded through CBTA, maybe we ask for 3 to 4. We ask for, there's not a lot of money through STBG, which is what the funds that TPO manages. There's not a lot of funds available through that year in and year out. So it's getting a piece there and a piece through the CBTA. And then if we need any, I did want to plug it into Smart Scale as a as-needed application. And again, if CBTA fully funds it up front, then again, the part about being flexible is now sliding in a new priority because we were able to get something fully funded ahead of schedule.
And we'll be able to apply in 3 different places, and if one gets approved, we can reshuffle the deck for
Correct.
later.
Yeah, if we apply for, say the cost estimate 6.5 million, just for a round number for CBTA, we only get awarded 4. Well, then we go through with either the TPO or the Smart Scale application because we need an extra $2.5 million.
When is the next Smart Scale open up?
Smart Scale pre-application will open up this following spring. So it will be April 1st-ish of 2024 will be the pre-application phase for Smart Scale. CBTA opens up this fall for an application cycle. TPO is going through their current application cycle, which is why we don't have any TPO listed for 2023. We have Pocket Road in current TPO funding. That project, with the sheer amount of dollars tied to that through the TPO, we didn't have another one ready to apply and didn't feel it was more or less appropriate given the conversations that have happened with the TPO and cost estimating, and our project kind of being at the forefront.
So this is effectively the prioritization that people are talking about.
More or less, yes. This is, and again, this is all proposed. Things can move as needed.
So TAP courthouse sidewalks, TAP, why is that out to 2025? Is that just when those TAP?
That's the next cycle.
That's the next
There's a
cycle.
cycle for this year, but I don't believe we'll get, I'm actually going to a pre-application workshop for both revenue share and TAP, I believe it's next week. And I don't know to the level we'll need due diligence on the courthouse sidewalk project to do some infill. It might not be a lot of due diligence, and again, it slides up to the 2023 slide. But currently, the next slot would be 2025, if we don't have all that due diligence.
Yeah, Austin, may I bring us back to the 30,000 feet again for just a second? In my mind, I'm picturing a map of the county with our primary roadways and intersections. And I'm picturing color-coded red, yellow, green. Red, we got transportation issues, yellow, it's borderline, green, everything's fine. And then I'm superimposing the most dangerous intersections, 10, 20 intersections. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's where we are today. And if we do all of this for the next 3 to 5 years and fully implement, how does the red lines and red intersections on that map change? You know, are we really addressing the most glaring needs if we fully implement it, or is it just because there's available money to do this, that, or the other thing?
I would say we are addressing those needs in that some of the projects, the Route 288 projects specifically, were out of studies that showed these solid red lines of major congestion issues. So we're solving some of those. The arterial management plan, which came out, looked at 250 from, I think, Mannequin Road in Centerville to the county line. It showed that congestion both at the time in 2015 plus the out years, assuming growth rates and such. So it's taking those projects that were recommended in the various studies, when they were recommended, take from red to green or red to yellow or yellow to green.
Yeah, I think
So
maybe I like where you're going is for the future is if we had some sort of visual, we've talked about working with VDOT on, kind of their, here's their map of where things are and linking either ours to theirs and kind of show that so there's an easy way to go, oh, we're making some really significant change here. We're, moving people quicker and safer through the county.
So I will say inherently that is where these projects are coming from. For the most part, I don't think this list, not being here for the full development of it, projects weren't just pulled out of thin air. They did develop out of some plan that showed red to green, yellow to green, and projects to the like that would solve some of those issues.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're actually moving the needle And we're not just, you know, running hard and spending money.
The goal here is not to spend money for the sake of spending money, it's to spend money to affect better change for transportation in the county.
Yeah, we're not spending it just because,
It's available. That's not the goal here either.
okay, yeah, good. I hear you. I just want to back up for a second and go, okay, are we really doing the highest and best use of our
And
time,
I
effort,
think
money?
some
move the
sort
needle.
of GIS visual aid that maybe we can pull together
Before
over
and after.
the next several months is, yeah.
Before we do all this is what it looks like. If we do all this plan, if we fully implement it aggressively and, you know,
Right.
implement this plan, this is where it'll take us.
And one thing, and I skipped over the current efforts part of the presentation just for the sake of time. If we have time, I'd love to get into it at the end. But one of the current efforts that we're undertaking that I think we can tie that directly into is project web pages. As far as projects that are currently underway or designed, we're going to hopefully have web pages for those before too long. I'd like it in the next several weeks, but we'll see how everything goes. It's maybe having one that has a map of this map that you're speaking to. It's where the applications are within the county, not only the underway projects. And then showing how they actually impact things.
Yes, yeah, I mean, I won't beat this, we can keep moving here, but in my town halls initially,
Mhm.
here's the 5 most dangerous intersections. I don't know if anybody can name those right now, but one of them that persistently every year was at the top was 288 Broad.
Right.
Before the traffic lights. And we need those traffic counts, those accidents and property damage and loss of life potentially, to go to VDOT and say, this is number 1 on our list, it's the most dangerous intersection, you've got to do something to stop the carnage here.
Right.
And they did, they put it top of the list, accelerated, got it done as soon as possible, and those lights have saved, I don't know how much, in terms of property damage and lives and whatnot. And so then my next town, I was able to show, okay, that was there, we've removed the top 2 or 3 from the list, the rest of them moved up.
Right.
Now we're gonna keep
Right.
working on those and take those off, and that way you can show some real progress toward dedicating our resources and time and money towards saving lives and property, and not only just keeping things moving and not having car in front of you, but save lives.
And that's the same intent behind what staff's put together here.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So these years, 23, 24, those calendar years or fiscal years?
They're calendar years.
Calendar years. So how did we get, so this is CIP, right?
Correct. CIP projects from the 2035 CIP and any projects that have come about since then, and whether it be a study, fairground corridor study, or a Route 250 or a Route 288 study.
So how did we get the Fairground Road Maidens Roundabout in this year's CIP?
So it's a little bit of a misnomer that the transportation CIP isn't a true CIP because there's not really any county dollars attached to it currently. It's,
But how did,
I guess you're asking why did it jump the
I'm
line?
asking how we got these priorities, because
So
this,
it-
we haven't looked at
It
these
had
priorities.
been very clear to staff that Fairgrounds Road's a road that needs some work, some improvements up and down the corridor. So for that reason, one of the solutions that came out of the study was a roundabout. Staff, through all the
We haven't looked at
analysis,
that whole study. I mean, remember, we just accepted it. We've not approved that study.
Well, and I think that's the purpose of this, to put stuff in front of us to react to.
Okay, yeah, this, I mean, I'm questioning the priorities here.
So, Ms. Lassblad, if I may, and this may not help, or may help or may not. If the board selected to move forward with any of the recommendations as applications from the safety study that was done for Fairground Road, they would fall best under these programs. And so Austin was just trying to
Okay, so
visually
this has
show.
got nothing to do with the CIP.
It's not set in stone, it's just, if they were to
That's
move
what's confusing.
forward, it would need to be in the next year to 2 years, because that's the funding cycles where they best fit.
Well, but you're saying in 23, we do funding maybe.
So
Is
this
this,
is-
I mean, is this like your proposed list?
Yes,
And-
correct.
Yes.
this is
Okay,
not,
so
It's-
this has got nothing to do with the CIP.
correct.
If
So
we were
it's-
trying to be
Okay.
strategic and,
So that's. I
highest
thought we said
likelihood of a
CIP,
successful
yes.
application based on
Okay.
data.
And historically, it's been called a transportation CIP. If the nomenclature is misleading, then it
Yeah.
should probably be changed.
Because that's not in our budget for this year.
Correct, correct.
Well, not, no, that's some
But
of it.
now, because we have local money that's in the mix,
Right,
it kind of is a hybrid of.
right.
So Austin,
Mhm.
based on, so I think you bring up a great point this last slide, which is based on we have the SGR, CBT, and revenue share local. Of those, what applications are we bumping up against so that, because we may have to come out of here with some more prioritization, say, well, you know what? You know, the last two, 288 southbound auxiliary lane, like, are the 23, we have to make a decision on the 23 applications, because that's what we're saying is, these are what the things that we're gonna go after from an application perspective in 2020, this year.
And
This year.
certainly,
And
no
that's
decision
my
needs to be made
question.
today. The CBTA's deadline for applications hasn't been set in stone, but it's the fall timeframe. My assumption would be the September and October timeframe. So obviously, a decision needs to happen well in advance of that. The 288 projects specifically are pegged for CBTA funds because they had been listed in the CBTA funding scenarios in the past. The Hard Shoulder Running Lane, the southbound Hard Shoulder Running Lane is a project that had CBTA funds attached to it. TPO took it through Smart Scale, it was unsuccessful. And the auxiliary lane is the project that we robbed the funds from to help fund the actual DDI and make that more competitive. So the thought process behind those is they were already priorities, so we need to then compete and continue to compete for those and get those projects fully funded as soon as possible.
Just to be clear, this is calendar, not fiscal.
Correct, this is calendar year.
So this year, so that'd be the 24 fiscal year.
No, those are calendar.
I know.
Yeah, the application cycles go by calendar year, not fiscal year, so that was the thought
So
behind that.
so then these projects should be on CIP that we're approving, getting ready to approve with our fiscal year 24 budget. These should be on there.
Those projects have no local, well, the one that's,
Let me ask
go
that.
ahead.
So would we typically, if we're looking to fund these not through local dollars, would they go on our CIP as budgeted items? I would think that would only be the case if we're bringing dollars to it. If we're saying, hey, we're going for, not to the local.
So the local funds that are identified there, and again, apologies for the confusion, CBTA local funds and/or proffer funds, so it's not anything that would need to be budgeted for. That conversation hasn't happened yet, that actually was potential conversation for later.
I think it's just part of the fairground road extension, because we're, fairground road extension, I thought that was a revenue share.
It was a revenue share. I've got some more information on that project. So it was a revenue share at the 2019 estimate of 4.4 million. The current estimate is 6.86 million. With additional monies the county had already kicked in.
Correct.
The total delta is 1.15 million. So
So you're just putting that out there.
Potential
Do we
proposal.
do we want to complete it with an additional 1.?
correct, 1.5 of CBTA local and/or proffer funds from the central
So,
districts.
so is it fair to say, what on this list would be in our
So
CIP?
this is all off budget.
This is all off
Correct.
budget, this is extra, this is like, I don't use the word in this room, but, so this is saying, hey, we're not carving off any of the revenues that we're generating in the county for this. We're counting on revenues from other revenue streams.
Yeah, but the CIP, maybe I'm wrong, I thought the CIP did account for multiple revenue sources, not
I'm
just
not-
local dollars.
That's why I'm asking the question, I'm not stating, I'm asking how we would have handled it in the past.
I think like the
The,
school.
the 2035 transportation CIP that I referenced earlier, I don't believe was officially adopted as part of the CIP. The spreadsheet was put together showing the revenues coming from grants and those types of sources, but I don't believe it was a part of the adopted countywide CIP because it came from non-tax revenue sources.
Okay.
Can we phone a friend? Carl, I see you in the back there.
Yeah, none of these projects would be, like our bottom line CIP is local
Only
dollars.
local dollars.
Well, checks that the county will write, whether they're reimbursed through grants or outside funds.
Okay,
But
that's
if,
probably,
if the county won't directly pay for this, that won't be in our CIP.
okay, so probably all right, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and again, apologies for any confusion on the term local. It's CBTA local and/or proffer funds that we funded other projects through anyway that weren't a part of any CIP.
And so at what point, how are these projects approved to go forward to even make application?
So that's part of the discussion
What we're
today
here for.
is,
Okay, good.
yeah,
Let's
that's
talk
part of
about
the
it.
conversation. This is just starting that process.
Okay.
Which is why I wanted to go out, I originally was gonna go out 6 years, it started to get too long of a list and too convoluted in the out years. I picked 6 years because that's a typical VDOT process, everything's a 6-year plan. I did half of that because this accommodates a lot of the current needs as listed in the 2035 list and the projects that came out of various studies.
So you picked stuff, so there could potentially be something that's 5 or 6 years out that could be moved sooner.
If we get a Project Rocky type project in another part of the county that changes the entire conversation overnight, then that may jump, a new project comes out of that and it jumps the line. That's the intent behind this too, it's very flexible.
Right, so I think,
Right.
I kind of felt like as we were setting this up, we make more progress when we have something to react to, rather than when we get to start from scratch, so staff.
No, I'm not,
Yeah, okay.
I'm just trying to understand, so even a local, another local project like I don't know if we do anything with the SPIDA study or whatever, that's not in here, right?
Speed is almost underway.
But there's no money, there's nothing in here.
That will be done through community development as a planning study, and then there may be very well some transportation recommendations as a
And
result.
if something comes out of the SPIDA when that's complete, then if it warrants jumping the line, then it will jump the line, if that's what the study suggests. So that's what I'm anticipating coming out of SPIDA.
Okay, just trying to get my head around all these pieces, parts.
When we talk about, none of this is tied to the budget. The budget is standalone, this is standalone, makes me feel a little uneasy.
Yeah.
Since I think we ought to have much more coordination than two standalone plans.
Yeah,
Now, I get the CIP is, how are we gonna pay for this? Where's our money coming from? And we need to maintain county facilities, but if there's large projects going on in the county that are not in the CIP, that perhaps are interdependent with the CIP, somehow we need to brainstorm and think about how to bring those two closer together so that they're coordinated. And I don't know exactly how I'm gonna sound with me here now, but I'd like to not have them be completely separate instead.
Well, then I go back, that was what I wrote, so seeing this, plus all the projects with the funding source, CIP. So we know everything's accounted for, we know where we believe money's coming from at the time. So for our next, having that for our next session, I think would be
So
super.
what is our role as board supervisors? What's our role in transportation? Tell us what
good job. You said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, it kind of goes to that connecting the pieces that you described, because I think that's what we're struggling with. We're not like a Chesterfield and with lots of local projects, lots of money, but we have a role for transportation that we didn't have 3 years ago.
Right.
So what was our role before? To help VDOT with priorities? To give them our input? Did we dictate anything? Did we dictate anything to VDOT? Or did we just partner with them and tell them our desires?
We did a lot of the dictating, more side-by-side relationship with, we still went through the smart scale process, we're actually very successful in very smart scale years with getting the current light at 64 in Ashland, the light at 288 in Broad, I believe was a smart scale application.
So we had
had been
something
telling
to do
VDOT.
with smart scale applications even before,
We were
So-
entirely dependent on
what's
VDOT
changed?
telling us what.
So if you want me to take a stab at answering your question, I think our role is to hear the staff's recommendations, help with prioritizations of those based on the goals that we have for the county, and then, especially as these are regional, to advocate for our projects in our regional bodies. And to remove roadblocks that come up, i.e. from VDOT or different places, so to provide air cover for staff.
what's missing in there is deployment of local CBTA dollars.
No, because local CTA dollars would come through recommendation of staff. Hey, we did this year. We said, okay, we're planning on pushing it through to Fairground, or to Route 6. We're gonna take that money and we're gonna put it on Bulldog Way. So we did that as a board. So we said, staff's like, here's, staff gives us the information we need to make educated decisions. We make the decisions and then we advocate for them.
Well, that's good, because that's our most, and so this kind of goes to the role of the board of supervisors versus staff. And that's what I've said, we can't get together every month and say, okay, do we want to put streetlights on this project, or, you know.
Well, that's a good question. Do we
Yes.
wanna get
Yes,
together?
sir.
Do we wanna have?
Jumping ahead, that's in the this discussion's also
Do
in
we
the
want
presentation.
to have a transportation committee that's two board members and staff that meet on a more regular basis to be able to advocate and help staff with these prioritization discussions? I think that's absolutely not just on the table, it's on the paper.
Because this is the thing that I'm interested in seeing how it folds out, is how best to deploy our CBT money? Because the more we get into this, the more convoluted it gets. How do we wisely?
Well, so the CBTA local dollars, the next slide was actually, this is what we have spent as far as CBTA and or local revenue dollars on transportation projects in the county. This is based off a 6-year plan, so FY '23 through FY '28. And again, the next few slides kind of touch on exactly how this conversation just went, asking for guidance from the board as far as that relationship with CBTA funds specifically. So the goal here is FY '25 through '28 is currently blank because we have no funds obligated in those fiscal years. But in order to make this successful, we need to do due diligence studies, any preliminary engineering we may need to do to make the application successful. Filling this chart makes the application plan successful. So it leads right into the conversation of, and this is a recap of the CIP, but it leads into framework for small projects, which is CBTA local funds is an entirely new opportunity for Houston County as far as transportation is concerned. There's 2 different types of projects. There's the small one-off projects, but also support projects. One thing staff wants to discuss, and again, pretty much how the conversation just went, is flexibility as far as what's even an option for the board relationship with staff for CBTA local funds, and I think even 2 slides further, it's how does this look? Is a whole board workshop, is there a potential for subcommittee? You know, again, what's the relationship? It's that exact conversation that just took place.
So this chart just shows it's CVTA only?
This is CBTA and proper local money
Okay, so this is.
that we spent on transportation projects.
So this is actual transportation dollars we have.
Correct. Either CBTA local or tax revenues or proper dollars.
So this is all local money?
Correct. And that's the intent behind this. VDOT does a good job of tracking state money. It's to track our money to advance these projects. And however this list looks 6 days from now, 6 months from now, advancing those requires us to plan and be thoughtful about our approach to the local dollars.
And just refreshment, we're at about what, 1.3 million local per year in CBTA funds? So
No, we get approximately 200K a month on average, so it's about 2.4 million.
2 point year, so that's every 6 months. So 2.4 million a year from the CBTA.
So this is money actually spent?
This is
Because
money,
we've got
in
money.
FY '23, we've cut checks for. FY '24 is the planned obligation for Bulldog Way.
Okay. So the Fairground Road extension.
That
we
is all
pledged-
local monies spent. That's the total checks that have been cut by the county to date, just north of 1.9 million.
But we pledged to whatever it is.
That's the total amount pledged and spent by the county on the roundabout. The rest of those
She said
dollars.
extension.
Oh, the extension, I'm sorry.
So
So
we
this
pledged
does
when
not
we
include the
pledged.
extension project. And I'm happy to add this to the list, but the county total has about 3.9 million pledged to the extension project.
Right. So that doesn't belong on this list?
It should have made the list, and I apologize. It
Okay.
should be in here. It's not currently programmed for a fiscal year, which is probably why I didn't put it on here. Because it's kind of an unknown, because it's not fully funded yet.
But we have pledged the money.
Correct. It's just not tied to a
Not
fiscal.
all the money we need to make it happen, though.
So-
Right.
No, I understand, which
So,
makes the
but that's-
question why it's even on our list. Yeah.
So I think that's great, so that's something we should add. We have prior funding, so the purple boxes get filled up. And then we as a board decide, okay, do we want to, how are we doing that? How are we gonna get that paid for?
And is there anything else that we have pledged? We didn't pledge anything to Oroville Exchange, because we,
The county has no local dollars tied to the whole
and there's
roundabout.
no local dollars to, the Hockett Road.
There are currently no local dollars tied to that project either.
Okay. So there's no that you can think of, but we got actually local dollars pledged, except that. And
Other than the
there's-
extension project, this is an encompassing list of local dollars tied to transportation-specific projects. Again, this doesn't go back to, 2010, 2015 timeframe. This is just really from the roundabout onward.
Right, right. And I can understand how maybe it wouldn't have made this, because it's sort of like not a column. Maybe
Well,
it
we-
should just be a column for amount pledged or something, just so the
We
place.
pledged it, it's just not tied to a fiscal
I
year
understand,
yet,
maybe
so.
just another column or something, just
No, I
so
think
that
that
we
makes
don't
sense.
forget to.
And that helps us plan also about. when
And you
we
know it's
plan on
stuck sitting
allocating
out
those
there.
funds. Right.
You know, the kind of dollars would be available for local match to try and
Absolutely.
enhance our chances on some of the other projects?
Absolutely, that's really the intent behind this, is the revenue share projects on here. For example, the Oldville Road interchange, revenue share / local. For that project specifically, the intent is we have about $600,000 through CBTA regional funds. Use that $600,000, match it in revenue share. That gets us almost about 50% of the $2.3 million gap that currently exists on the project, and then potentially funding it with CBTA and/or profit dollars accordingly.
I think it's important to note, so like revenue share is a 1-for-1 match, it's 50% up to $10 million. Transportation alternatives, it's an 80-20 match, so as we go through and start trying to strategize.
TAPS, is that what?
Yeah,
Yes,
TAP,
it's
Transportation Alternative Program.
Okay.
80% is fully funded, 20% gets funded by the locality of project cost, and Smart Scale is fully funded. State of good repair, it varies, but I think that that's why it's important as we try to strategize, then we're knowing, okay, where do we really get the highest and best use of the direct local proffer and CVTA grant dollars that are coming under direct control where we can leverage it best, whether that's studies, whether that's matching dollars.
So let me ask you a question on this. We go back to the, I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah, no,
Okay.
good, yeah.
So the I-64 and Oilville Road Exchange,
Yes.
is that the roundabout?
At I-64 West and Old. Yes.
Okay, so I thought we had just said that there was no local dollars attached to that. Were they CBTA dollars at 600,000 you referenced?
CBTA region.
CBTA, okay, so those are CBTA
Correct.
regional. So what is it, when are we ready to like move forward on that project? We've got some applications in that area now, we've got traffic backing up on the 64.
So that
People
project-
making right turns and turning around the gas station.
So that project specifically, I've got a quick snippet about it. So it was, the current total cost estimate, $7.51 million from Smart Scale, because it was a Smart Scale application. Project status, we have $606,000 in CBT regional funds. We have received and we're working to obligate the funds from the federal government omnibus bill that was signed in December. We have $4 million through that. So $2.91 million funding shortfall. The theory is potentially, again, it's a recommendation, entirely up to the board and how things shake out, is to take the 606, get a free match essentially through revenue share. We're doubling our CBTA regional funds there, and then working potentially with local funds, CBTA and/or profit dollars to fund the remaining gap.
So let me ask you, do you have, I'm sorry to spring on this, spring this on you, but do you have any sense of where we are with those federal funds?
They have officially been awarded because the bill was signed back in December. I'm waiting on, and I actually got some correspondence with Representative Spanberger's office, who we went through when we were in District 7 to get the project in the bill. Her staff reached out, I believe, last week, and the funds, because they're federal, won't flow directly to Goochland County, they will flow to VDOT. So we are working on, waiting on that process to go through. Once that happens, we're gonna coordinate with VDOT accordingly to get the funds obligated to certain fiscal years and so on.
And do you know if there's any time constraints, like, do we have to use them in a certain amount of time? Like, some of these things, for those that we're really getting to figure out this transportation stuff. So where we were 3.5 years ago, here are light years. I don't know if we're more confused or have more information, but there's some of these things like CVTA or Smart Scale, if you don't fully fund the project, then it's not really gonna be eligible. So do we know to move this project forward if we're applying for like revenue share?
Mhm.
Does that have to get the project to fully done? So are the decisions that we need to make, like, okay, we need to make a decision about this revenue share, because we're gonna lose $4 million of federal funds, or
The $4 million, as part of the application process, it was, will the funds be obligated by the end of fiscal year 23? Obligated in their definition is assigned to a project, assigned to fiscal years and coordinated through VDOT. So that will be done as far, not reading all the fine print of the federal bill, that is the only time constraint I'm aware of on the federal dollars, is that they have to be assigned to the project by the end of this fiscal year.
And then how long will VDOT let it just sit there while we try to figure out the rest of the funding?
It will go through the normal VDOT 6-year plan life cycle, which is if we go through few rounds, say we decide either not to do the revenue share or we do it and the gap is too large for local funds to make up the difference, we have to pursue, say, more CBTA funds. We'll just keep swapping the funds back fiscal years until we're able. We just have to show a good faith effort to keep that project moving forward.
So I'm gonna ask a real dumb question.
Okay.
We still have to go through smart scale.
For the Oval roundabout, no, it was this past round's application, it was unsuccessful.
I was hoping-
Ideally, we do not have to go back through that, because that will make the cost go back up.
Yeah, it will. And that's how we got the 7.5 million, was going through the smart scale
Correct.
process.
That's a very, very conservative estimate. So with that, again, the theme of the transportation funding is flexibility. The priorities are gonna shift consistently. So project order may change and new projects may jump the line. And I wanted to touch on this again real quick, is the theory about small projects. There's really two types of small projects that staff sees. It's one-off projects, which are turn lanes, rumble strips, sidewalk projects, trails, those types of things. And then your support projects, which are studies, analysis, any survey, anything that needs to be done in support of an application. CBTA local funds obviously give us a whole new opportunity to fund those types of projects, whether they be one-off or support projects. I don't know if there's anything the board has in mind or has any thoughts on flexibility needed to accommodate the support project specifically. The example I'll use is for one of our smart scale applications for Hockett Road. We happened to hit the timing right, but we needed an extra small study done that VDOT requested at the 11th hour. It happened to work out that I was able to get it on a 2x2 agenda, get the $4,000 allocated from CBTA local, and was able to get RK&K, the PO, open prior to when we needed the study. They also, in good faith, moved forward with it before the funding was actually available. But in situations like that, the real small dollar amounts for the support analysis, because through the smart scale process, VDOT says, hey, the deadline's next week. By the way, we still need an additional signal warrant analysis, or we still need X, Y, and Z done on a project. So I just wanted to solicit some discussion and feedback from the board on any flexibility that may exist there.
You know, county administrator has, flexibility to do on budget.
It's my understanding it doesn't apply to CBTA local funds, so I don't,
There should be some kind of parallel of that, where we don't, at this board, shouldn't be making $4,000 decisions. I would say, Charlie?
I was just gonna say, can we give that authority can we just vote as a board, give an authority up to, what would be the number in your mind? It's right, 10,000?
does it parallel the county administrator's current threshold? I don't know. I think it would, I would need to look back and figure out what's a typical cost or an average cost of that last minute support project. The support projects that we know we need that are it's gonna be a $50,000, $75,000 study, we'll know that heading into smart scale, heading into CBTA. We'll be able to plan accordingly. But it's the $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 projects that may require that quick pivot. I don't know what the ultimate threshold may be.
So what I think from this, what we're hearing, I think you asked a question, right?
Yeah.
Hey, would
Just
we
soliciting.
support this, or would we, heck no. If it's $100, bring it to us. What you're hearing is there's appetite for it. I would recommend maybe staff comes back with a proposal of what a procedure could look like that we could react to.
Absolutely.
The question is, do we want to keep pulling together like this every quarter to do this, or can we do what I think would be more efficient? And I ask for a subcommittee, to launch a transportation subcommittee that can meet more frequently.
And that leads into the workshop form moving forward. Does the board go ahead?
Sorry, to that point, I
Yeah.
don't want
Go
to
ahead.
forget it. I would also like you to add not just what you think the dollar threshold is, but please add, don't compute it, but say, these are the hours of resources that we're consuming.
That's a great point, Sharon.
4 hours of 5 supervisors, county administration, all these, I mean, your best estimate to what it would take, what we're consuming right now, we can figure out in our minds, or we can go deeper and do the dollar things, but you know better how many people we actually have to get to formally approve these things now. And I don't want it to be just, because we look at a hard dollar number of 5,000, and in reality, it's 20,000.
Right.
When we consume true
Right.
resources.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the dollars
I
might not be
definitely
the,
understand that.
Yeah.
right, the measure.
Love that.
So I don't want to pin you on the dollar amount, but please put the resource amounts in front of us.
We will definitely do a pretty deep dive on that. I guess what's the board hourly rate?
About 23 cents. I don't know if you want to put hours.
No, that's why I didn't want him to compute it.
All right.
$12.
We get insurance, come on, man.
One thing that may be helpful too for you all as a board to consider moving forward as we talk strategy is also looking at, is there appetite, or as we grow the program, given the complex transportation needs that emerge, any direct local dollars within the actual budget, you know, if that then becomes the primary for some small supportive studies, and then, you know, how you're using CBTA local, if it's mainly just the actual physical work itself occurring, like the construction or the application match. But those are things to think through as well. So there's a lot of ways to skin the cat.
Right.
Some of the challenges with that is like, I think how we might use CBTA dollars will depend on how the TPO votes next month on a recommendation coming from TAC on how to manage cost overruns. Because I think
Right,
one
that's
solution would put us in a situation where we'd have to probably end up having to use local dollars to do more planning. But then that's on the TPO side. Is CBTA going to do some things that will help smaller jurisdictions on the planning? Will they maybe implement some intentional ways to help smaller jurisdictions do planning or whatever? So there's so many moving parts. And so to your point about, and Neil, you were tipping your hand there, you'd think, could we do this more efficiently than all five of us getting together once a quarter? And I think so, but you're going to have new board members next time around, and we have a representative on CBTA, we have a representative on TPO. And then, of course, we have projects scattered through all the county. I don't have an answer. I know, yes, maybe a subcommittee would be good for efficiency, but we all, I mean, like I said, you're on CBTA, I'm on TPO, and I'm still learning all the pieces of TPO, and I'm seeing how it's kind of important what CBTA is doing is how those fit.
And maybe it's a hybrid approach, that it's still every quarter, but it's 2 subcommittees, 2 workshops. I just was thinking about ideas, just brainstorming myself as staff. I wanted to just solicit feedback, number one, on the workshop format and such, and do we want to continue the full board format every quarter, or is it changing?
Well, I think it's probably, like this whole thing, it's gonna constantly change.
Yeah, I feel like it changes. I think this has been super helpful, especially as we're kicking off, getting more into transportation. However, I do think, you know, what's my phrase, iterate to grade. So if we can have a smaller subset that can do some of the, you know, I peppered you all with questions yesterday, have another one, then we kind of bring it to the full board at reasonable times around so that we could be a little bit more prepared to say, all right, here's that list of all the projects, pros and cons of putting it here, here's our recommendation, and then the board can really react to go, yes, we're setting the priorities for the year of those projects.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, you may want to at least kick around some of the different things that could occur, because a couple members of the board who perhaps would make representatives, you know, on our other transportation things, could meet with staff more regularly without forming an official subcommittee, which then, you know, follows all the FOIA rules and has public meetings, not private discussions.
Okay.
You may want to step next to that informal ability to meet with staff
Fair enough.
without forming an official committee.
Just wanted to form a subcommittee. God,
I'm sure
this gavel has so little power, it's ridiculous. Okay, that's very, thank you for that. Okay.
But I think that, you know, the one thing that's got me a little uneasy, I guess you should say, is the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
How are we setting these priorities? Is it only because funds are available? 2023, you know, everything in this group, you know, these are our top priorities. I'm just not sure.
And I think that's why if we could work on figuring out how to get that in a format for the full board to go, this is exactly how it came, or here, we're asking you to prioritize these 1 through 10, and come up with a way to actually do that. I think that's important.
But see,
Well,
yes,
I
and
did want to throw something together again to solicit discussion.
Right, no, I mean, this is great, I mean, this is really, and I think, just for example, the Fairgrounds Road extension. We've already got money in the game, we need more money.
Right.
Does this make sense? Does this, what are the pros and cons
Right.
in that? It's just one example.
Okay, yeah, just following on everything that was just said, we got Plan RVA, CBTA, our TPO, folks, yeah, that's it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that attend meetings regularly, and if you don't have a black belt in this stuff, you maybe get a brown belt, and maybe your staff has black belts in this stuff, to know what all those initials mean, know what all the funding sources are, know what all the gates are, know what. And I would think it would make sense that when the folks that go to those meetings pick up new information, there certainly ought to be some kind of a backstreet connect with staff, so there's an information sharing there, coordination there, drafting this kind of stuff there, and then we have monthly board meetings where if there's a decision being made by the board in a public setting on the priorities, we have 12 opportunities to bring that forward from that information sharing group, and then say, broader board, what do you think? This is what the experts in this stuff. Maybe I have a white belt, but whatever the one that keeps your road closed, that's the other one I have. And, but anyway, you see where I'm going with this.
And I do think, Mr. Lumpkins, you touched on this earlier, that whether it's the intent of the region or not, I think CBTA and TPO are going to become somewhat intertwined with cost overrun, specifically how we manage that aspect of regional transportation funding. And maybe it makes sense for both representatives to be on the standing, informal.
And before, to comment, react to what you said, Ken, yes, I think we're gonna be able to bring back the processes to better understand, okay, and work with staff to figure out, okay, here's how we can be more successful, and we still have to come back, like you said, in the meetings to realize, okay, here's our game plan, here's how we're gonna handle this.
Similarly, you're exactly right, and it makes sense, like Tara said, to have the representatives of the TPO. The policy board at the TPO, you speak to CVTA, but I've seen the policy board at the TPO was very different when I got on this board and I was our representative. Very, very different. You just kind of paid attention to what was going through and you're like, okay, yep. But now that we have more involvement, everybody's sitting up at these meetings. And we're having the same problem with the policy board where we can tend to, at least I know, me being chair of it, I sometimes dive in and ask questions. And I can see the room is much more engaged than it was 3 years ago. But the bigger counties have a very active, and you are, as I'm not saying you're not active, but they have a long time involvement in TAC, the technical advisory committees. And there's TAC for both CBTA and TAC for TPO. And the message I'm getting from TPO staff is, you've got to lean on your TAC person, Austin, because that's what people do. So that, and the action has to come from TAC. And that, we just went through that this last month with, at the meeting, we have a decision to make and it's been kicking down the road. And I told the group, I said, we got to tell TAC to get us a recommendation next month. And so we're kind of facing the same thing, I think, as the board of supervisors. We have to get our transportation team to come to us with recommendations, because the same thing's happening on the TPO. The policy board, the board of supervisors, we can't get the black belts and we can't get into the weeds. So we need to foster, so to Tara's point, I think that, and you and I are starting to do that more, like we've got to, after you had your TAC committee this morning, we're gonna huddle up after that. I'm gonna have a handle on what's coming from TAC to the TPO next month. And I think the same analogous thing has to happen for us.
So,
Yeah, just because one of the beautiful things about this board is with a mutual trust and respect, we can develop pockets of expertise and let folks run with it, and not have to have all five of us go do everything all together.
It's unworkable.
Yeah.
It's not working.
yeah. Okay, so I think we did want to touch on the Fairgrounds Road piece a little bit.
So yeah, that's the CIP wrap up.
And we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, so this is a quick little follow-up to the Fairground Road Corridor study that was presented to the board on the 7th of March. Board did pass a motion to receive the study. the study will allow staff to coordinate with VDOT on the implementation of the various improvements identified within the study. The short, mid, and long-term improvements, the short-term improvements are of the cheap improvements, so to speak. It's signage, striping, tree trimming, things along those lines that are quick, easy, safety-driven projects that can be handled and immediately improve the corridor. Staff will begin to prioritize the midterm improvements, which is your rumble strips, your shoulder widening, et cetera, anything that VDOT can't do in their current maintenance budget that we have to find a funding source for, and work, again, in the list, the conversation we just had is throwing in those priorities as well. And then again, we're beginning to prioritize and already have started to prioritize the long-term improvements, the intersection improvements. So it's finding the right application and/or funding opportunities for each project. Two things in the study that I wanted to touch on very briefly today that were brought up, both citizen and board concerns, were the growth rate and crash data. The growth rate is more or less subjective. It's a rate that is derived from the travel demand model. Its intent is to not follow population growth to a T. It's a vehicle growth on the roads. So if the county, which has seen 5.6% growth in the last year, it does not automatically correlate to a 5.6% increase in the number of vehicles that are going to be on a given road. Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, I'm sorry if you're going to, this was the big hang up at the board meeting.
Correct.
In your expertise, are we gonna move this at all? I didn't get the impression that we were gonna move something that is more VDOT's, standard
So
or even national standard.
The travel demand model is the regional Bible, so to speak, the gospel of growth rates.
And regional is
Is
Central Virginia
and the state.
Okay.
Specifically regional, kind of taking a, not a 50,000 foot view, but a 10,000 foot view of kind of the landscape. Regionally, the TDM, the travel demand model, is what's used. It suggests in Central Virginia a 0.6% growth rate across the board. Originally, the Fairground Road Corridor study only had a 1% growth rate. In talking with the consultants at VDOT, staff's goal was to incorporate, to the best extent possible, the village plans, knowing they weren't public and not knowing fully what's going to come out of them. We did make the decision to conservatively bump it to a 1.5% growth rate. Historically, in the east end of the counties where we're going to see our highest growth rates, on recent TIAs, we've only seen a max 2.5% travel growth rate. Again, that is the vehicles that are on a road. So what I don't want is to be confused with population growth rate, because they are two distinct rates.
Can I
Go
make a
ahead.
suggestion? In that regard,
Mhm.
to the extent we've got a 1.5% growth rate, if we could do numbers with a 1.5% growth rate and what we know to be the max, then we stop hours and hours of contention over, this isn't the actual growth rate. I mean, I just want to, we need that expertise from you and from the people interacting with these state and federal agencies. And what happens is people see that and they grow irate just for that very reason. So population's growing way more. They don't have the details, they don't have the expertise, and I'd almost like to frame discussions like this so that we're saying, look, we need to be in a funnel, not way up in here.
And part of that is the Weldon Cooper projection, which is what it's a facility through UVA that projects population for the entire region. The county has grown 5.06% since 2017 to now, when the last Weldon Cooper numbers were done based on the 2020 census. So that's 3 years at roughly the same 5%. Those numbers are baked into the 0.6% that the TDM recommends. 0.6% I think is way too low for this county. I think this county is seeing growth that is higher than the average in Central Virginia. I think it's plainly obvious.
But if we can't get it, we can't get it. It's
Well,
not the reality.
Well, and I think to your point, we had this discussion yesterday, growth, just to change it to traffic rates or just
Yeah, that's a good
even
point.
that, just
Yeah.
to say, the traffic rate is this, it's going to this, whether, and it's, an increase of X percentage of vehicles or whatever that looks like. It's not, when you're not doing this every day, it gets challenging.
So I did want to point out specifically that the population numbers are currently baked into that. So it's the last bullet is that this is the model that's used regionally. So for our study to be taken, quite frankly, seriously, if we were to throw in a 5%, we'd have to justify 5% the same way we'd have to justify 0.6%. If we were to go forward with a Smart Sky application for the roundabout, just to pick on that one, with a 5% growth rate, I would envision VDOT saying absolutely not. This study's not gonna be warranted, that improvement's not warranted if you don't have a 5% growth rate. So I think VDOT would kick it back if we had a growth rate actually match county rate.
Ken and I could give you examples of when you see a financial projection model and it has 7% growth for the next 10 years, you just chuck it. You're like, that's not, you wish, yeah, you wish, and you wish you could base your value on that, but we're not gonna base a financial projection model. And I think it's tough for us to swallow because of the growth we are having, but we need to realize I don't want us to fight losing battles as a county.
Well, and that's why the county staff, we pushed for, instead of 1%, 1.5%, because we wanted to be more conservative, within the bounds that were allowed. Again, I wouldn't have seen VDOT or the consultants accepting a 4, 5, 6% growth rate to match the county growth rate. Okay. The other thing that was touched on was the crash data. Crash data that was used in the study, and all studies that we'll see for any project that we'll ever submit for any kind of funding, uses the DMV crash data, which is different than the Sheriff's Department crash data. As noted in the presentations from the 7th, the Sheriff's Department recorded 66 crashes in 2022. DMV only has a record of approximately 28 crashes in the same time frame. So there's an inherent disconnect there. However, the model we have to use for funding applications is the DMV crash data for smart scale, et cetera. For the National Road DDI, to show that we only have, and I'm sure the Sheriff's Department has higher numbers, we showed we have 15 wrecks over the course of, from 20, what was the dates, Crystal, 2020 to now? To
Yeah,
the
2020
present.
to now.
We only have 15 wrecks in and around that interchange. That's according to DMV. That made our application very competitive, but that's what studies like that have to use, are those types of data.
It doesn't help us to correct the problems on Fairground Road.
And to
Or
Mr.
anywhere else
Peterson's
for that
point
matter.
earlier, it's about staff using the unofficial, unreported numbers
Right.
to guide the priorities that may not be properly reflected in the study, so to speak. But it's using those local numbers that we actually have knowledge of to
Right. And see,
better
also,
align our priorities.
You know, they also didn't look at Fairground and Dickinson. And once the roundabout is in, right now there's a natural break.
Right.
So you can get in and out of Dickinson
Right.
Road because traffic
Right.
stops at Sandy Hook.
Right.
Now it's not gonna stop.
I had a
So there's never gonna
conversation.
be a time you can get out of Dickinson Road.
I had a conversation with VDOT about that intersection after we had made that comment, that because it's gonna be a temporary condition, it didn't warrant studying it as if it was a permanent condition.
What's gonna be a temporary condition?
The detour.
No, I'm not talking about the detour. I'm talking about once the roundabout is in, all that traffic is gonna flow automatically. There's not gonna be a natural stop like there is right now that you can get in and out of Dickinson Road, is what I'm saying.
I understand.
Right now, because traffic does stop right here, right, naturally. Cars are coming, get got stopped.
Then I misunderstood your
Now,
concern
I may
about
have
not
not
having
said it
Dickinson.
well, but it's not temporary. It's gonna be forever once the
And,
roundabout's in.
and then I misunderstood. I took it as your concern was about Dickinson during the detour, because Dickinson
no.
will be a mess during the detour.
No,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, then I misunderstood.
But keep in mind, the Reynolds property is part of the court, the
Right,
courthouse
right.
village. So that's gonna, whatever it's gonna be some kind of, development there, right?
Right.
So it's just gonna compound, and it didn't even look at that. So, I just have some concerns on this, so.
And unfortunately, as far as the study goes and to be competitive, it's the numbers we have to use are the DMV ones. That's not something that we can arbitrarily change, but it is using the local data to make those priorities as far as, okay, DMV's crash data may not say this intersection's higher than Dickinson and Fairgrounds, for example, but we know that Dickinson and Fairgrounds is the problem, so we're gonna actually pursue that one over the other intersections.
Austin, why are the numbers from DMV and Houston County Sheriff's Office so low?
So DMV only, I don't have the exact dollar figure, but the Sheriff's Department only, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
It's
made-
$1,500 more.
What was the
So
total?
if the accident is $1,500 or more than this report will be, or
Okay.
any injury in the accident.
So that makes this opposite, then wouldn't the DMV be higher?
No,
No, no,
we
no,
just need a
no,
report.
They
To the DMV.
They report non-reportable. The sheriff's office
Oh,
reports
so-
non-reportable.
so-
Gotcha.
So track all accidents, but if it's over $1,500 or an injury.
So DMV does get, so there's this, these 28 accidents are a subset of that 66.
Gotcha.
The sheriff's office doesn't, it's not
So if you
required.
trade paint with somebody, DMV's not gonna know about it, but the sheriff's department will.
So if the sheriff's department reported everything, would give us a better chance.
And to that end, right,
So do you have questions on
Further recommendation?
It was just an report.
So.
I just wanted to touch on those couple of concerns. I am, yes, it is.
So Fairground Extension, Fairground Road Extension, what's our deadline to make a decision on whether we'll fund that?
So I talked to VDOT about the phrasing that was used at the executive committee, or the executive meeting, which was critical decision needed. Critical decision is a VDOT internal terminology. There's not a decision needed by July 1 or else funding goes away. It's, hey, it's for VDOT to be reminded themselves to poke us as a county to get that project fully funded and off the books. In reality, if we don't come up with the additional $1 million in the next 12 months, I would see VDOT having a conversation with us about programming the funding elsewhere. But
so to give context for those that weren't, there was a meeting that we had, and VDOT brought up the fact that those funds have been sitting there for the fairgrounds, or they're matching funds. And they're like, what are you gonna do? You need to make a decision, because if you're not gonna use them, they're gonna go someplace else, so.
there's currently not a drop dead date, but they would start having conversations with us probably starting in 6 months and then a year about our series.
I think we ought to decide, because
Well, we ought to
costs are going
decide,
up.
it's a number.
And Susan, I would just tell you, I think we talked about this before, all that land on that extension, we can cover this gap by selling the county land along that, which
It's
is the
not all
plan.
county owned, right?
Not, a lot of it.
I'm not saying
I'm-
we should or we shouldn't. I think it needs to be prioritized with other projects.
But I'm just saying, there's some, we kind of have to wait and see the village, sort of wait and see the
Exactly.
village plan.
Exactly,
But
yeah.
I think we know how it's gonna go as far as that goes, because we do have that land.
And we've got some other roads we want to build in the village and stuff too. So I want to see how it all, that's all I'm
Okay.
saying.
Right, but I think we should make that a priority, make a decision.
Maybe by the end of the year or something.
Well, I'd say sooner.
Sooner than that.
VDOT would like a decision summer timeframe. Again, there's no drop dead date, but we did tell them, can you give us till July to make it more or less definitive?
It'd
decision
be
on
easier
that
if we could redirect their share of revenue share, but we can't. It goes back to the state bucket, or
Right,
something,
right.
any other jurisdiction in the district.
And the money we pledge would come back to us.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't actually spent
We
it.
have to spend
Correct.
it. But it would be
Then
removed
come
from
out
our
of
Just
that.
sitting in another bucket.
It would go to
If it's
unassigned, it would go to
3.9
unassigned.
million, we could put somewhere else, in theory.
In theory, yes.
I'm not saying we should, just asking.
So I
I'm
guess
saying we should.
one last thought is the general direction is village study, we'll kind of see how that comes out, and then we'll maybe have a definitive answer on the extension.
Yeah.
We
Okay,
put all those
okay.
together.
That's-
I agree.
Okay, that's fine. All right.
Whew. Good night.
Last one, sprint to the end.
Exactly. Imagine figuring out how to do that mixing bowl up in Northern Virginia. All right, so what I kind of heard takeaways for me at least was, we're going to work on pulling the CIP data and the data for our potential funding sources and our approach together, so we have one holistic list. We're also going to be looking at how to better utilize the resources from the board to help inform staff so that we can, next step, come with and have a good session of actual prioritization to say, hey, this is these are the priorities as we see them, and build out a plan. Just worth mentioning, I don't know if we could do something like this, but I'm really liking what Mr. Drumwright and Firefly have done with all the different projects and the stages, and you can kind of see where they are. And so some sort of visual like that, I think would be aspirational. Also working on some sort of visual for the county. Saturday, somebody said, so I heard you guys are like a year behind on the roundabout and you guys completely underestimated the Fairgrounds Road extension. I'm like, well, neither of those things are true at all, but people are talking about those things. Now that we're seeing construction in the county, knowing where folks are like, you can go on VDOT's website and show it's actually ahead of schedule. And they were shocked to hear that. So, but great stuff. Let's take did anybody hear anything else from a takeaway perspective, or did I get it all? Shocking. Well, then I gotta take a 10-minute recess, and we'll come back and talk about big CIP budget stuff. Thanks. Big hand on the six.
It is
And this time,
Is there pie? Is that what you're-
I knew where I was going with
It's not like buying cars.
I think there's only one or two copies. Oh.
But do all the board members have a copy?
They all have those. Okay, I'm looking for the copies, because I don't see one for lumps.
He's got one, he's got one.
They're underneath, Lisa.
Oh, okay, all right.
I don't know if I just gave you mine, but I know it.
Here, take one.
No, I'm good.
Sure?
No, there's.
If I need it, I'll grab it.
Okay, fair enough.
So, you could always say, keep those. You're still talking, another minute. We'll miss you, Mr. Welcome. And this, ladies. So the bracket's supposed to be filled out by now? Can we fill out brackets? Where are we with brackets?
Until Thursday.
Until Thursday, all right.
Come on, Neil.
I'm spending so much time on transportation, I can't figure out the brackets.
So we have a hard stop.
I mean,
We have a hard
brackets. What kind of
stop.
brackets we talk about?
Exactly.
I thought that's what this was, I was looking at UVA.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't find it.
All right, I think I got at least all the board back. Let's get that.
I can't really tell. It looks like it's not quite.
Good. All right, we'll go back in session. All right, Mrs. Reed, we're here to talk about our CIP. Very
Yes,
exciting stuff.
very exciting stuff.
Take it away.
All right, this presentation is gonna focus on just the first 5 years. I also have given you all the 11 by 17, which includes 25 years, but so far down the road, so hard to predict costs and needs that we'll just focus on 5 years today.
Okay.
So in considering which projects to prioritize here, we looked at, as you know, we paid for maintenance and, all of our IT system upgrades and server refreshes out of our CIP. So we had to look at the life cycles of different facilities and major operating systems of equipment, how much to fund in each of those pots. We also had to take inflation into account by using the CPI. And again, the farther out you go, you can only predict whether inflation is going to stay as high as it is now or return to normal levels. I think we went on the conservative end and kept it high. And we evaluated alternatives to maintaining existing structures versus building everything new. We just don't have a money stream available, unfortunately. So aside from the ability to cash fund certain projects, that's always the goal, if we've got it there. But we do have the courthouse being paid for in FY26, $28 million project, will likely be more, but we're sticking with 28 for now. We hope to borrow within our debt capacity, well, we will borrow within our debt capacity to follow our models, and maintain our current tax rate. The goal is to not have to raise taxes to fund any of these projects. And to make Mr. Peterson very happy with this presentation, we are very aware of the fact that we need to keep our assigned and unassigned fund balance level. Those need to grow as our bottom line budget expenses grow. So, while I'm going to show you the projects that are requested by departments, we know that we have levels that we need to stick to. Okay, so we can get into it. This is a look at what's being adopted with the 2024 budget. It's 76% to education, as you know, with the funding to Goshen Elementary School. That's $15 million is the bulk of that. Fire rescue does include, some expensive apparatuses, but also another $1 million towards the West Creek Fire Station. So that comes to 12%. And as for the 5-year, that looks a little more close to what you're used to seeing, probably 53% to education. The courthouse is included here to come up to that 22% in judicial, for $118 million in 5 years. Before I get into each department, I was gonna go through the projects by department, but I've got both facilities and Parks and Rec here that need to get out a little bit early, so I'd love to not start with education, because theirs is the biggest and probably the longest. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna skip down to facilities first.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody? And I'll let Scott take over here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Scott Foster, Director of General Services. So the administration building life cycle, that covers rooftop units. This building has multiple levels of roofs, and several of the roofs are beyond 20 to 25 years old, so that's what that life cycle is in year 26. You want me to go line by line? Is that the game plan here?
I would say hit the high points.
Is there anyone in particular you want me to discuss, or any questions?
Tell us about the library.
The library, that is $285,000, that's proffer money that we received for library expansion. I have met with Mr. Shepley and gotten an estimate on adding on physical space to it, and it wasn't the direction he felt the library should go. He's looking at, similar to a red box, it's a book vending type situation for there, or other opportunities for more PCs. It's the above the 285 was county funded, but that's why it's proper money, and it's only for the expansion of the library, is why it hasn't been spent or been no real momentum on that.
It's been brought to my attention a couple times, there's some minor incidents that have occurred that the real significant lack of cameras around the complex. And I see we've got 50,000 proposed each time. Is there a plan to get us to sort of a baseline to where we feel like we've got adequate coverage?
Yes, we're continually finding holes in our coverage, and we're continually trying to upgrade cameras. I actually have a meeting with our camera vendor, Dominion Lock, next Wednesday to go over that and to go over where. I know one, for example, the registrar has determined he needs one that shines on where the voting machines are kept. So any track who goes in and out of there, that's a spot we weren't aware of. But out at the Central High School, it's lacking cameras out there, that whole complex. Down on the courthouse complex, we have some areas, and I know the sheriff's office has some areas they'd like to see additional
But
cameras.
do you feel this 50,000 spread out over time is representative of what we need to get us sort of to a baseline, or should?
Over time, it'll get us, if we want to get there quicker, then yes, maybe we should look at increasing that in the 24, 25 potentially, to get us there, depending on how big of a hit we want to take.
But that's not only cameras.
That's not only cameras, that's any door security or access control or anything like that, that is correct. I think, yes, sir.
Excuse me, this is a stupid question. What's the color coding?
Everything in pink is a life cycle maintenance type
Okay.
thing, and that's actually what's funded. I mean, a lot of this is funded from general fund, but this is what's a recurring general fund expense.
Go ahead. So the million for the East End mini communities, that's in the out years. Is that the first time that's been in our 5 years?
I think that's been in there in the past, to my knowledge. It's a placeholder because we know there's a need for a East End Convenience Center at some point, or we get a lot of requests for that.
So we don't know what, is that for identification of land acquisition?
Yes, and that site would be, what we're looking at that site is not a site that takes brush. It would be compactor sitting on top of pavement, kind of like Louisa has something similar, and just some recycling on top. It would be a one-man operation, a little small building for them with a restroom. It would not be a large, mainly be recycling, household trash, no brush, nothing like that. And yes, we have not acquired land or anything from that project. It's a placeholder at this point.
And I may have answered, if I would have read this line below it, administration building and campus security at $200,000, is that potentially, is Is that something different?
Administration complex renovation?
No,
The very last
very
line,
last
very
one.
last line.
Yes, that was added, I believe, and I can let Carla speak to that. That was added in addition, I believe.
Yeah, this was a suggestion from Mr. Carpenter to, and I think it will aid those 50,000s each year, but it includes the same type of security, but to this building. But
Okay.
that's probably on the high side, so it can be security.
Well, I think we had a work session about a year and a half ago when we had protesters in the area.
Yes.
And, you know, we were working on a plan, that we wanted to make sure that we're buttoned up.
Yes.
With all our security.
And
Met
if you
with-
put a bug in his ear about that, that's exactly where that came from.
Yes, yeah, we worked with the sheriff's office after those demonstrations and protests, and they found some holes, or several holes, and a lot of those we're currently trying to fix right now. We have some cameras that are on order, and the camera was subject to that chip that a lot of stuff was, so we've been waiting for 9, 10 months for the camera in some situations.
So the last line is the administration building here. The line above it, the security
Just-
improvements, is anything but here.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Couple things real quick. Vehicle replacement, third way down, 150, 150, 150. I'm guessing vehicles 5 years from now will cost a little more than they do today, so it's a
Yeah.
drift tire or something. Not a big
We're gonna
deal.
buy fewer vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, that answers that question. Boots on the ground. And then, I don't, it may be on a subsequent slide, so if it's a stupid question, fine, but, we're gonna be abandoning a facility, the old GES, and
Yes, sir, that's under administration complex renovation, FY '28, 650,000 was put there as a placeholder to renovate the old GES, but at this point, I don't even know the plan of who's potentially moving in there or what renovations are taking place. That was just a placeholder.
Well, that's good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and then the million for the convenience center, we've got 2 convenience centers now, and from the east end, they're not.
Yes, we routinely get questions and complaints or requests to have one down in that area. Yes, sir.
Howard Drive each way, I don't know if we need it, but anyway, okay. All right, those are the big numbers, I think. The general services relocation, that wasn't contemplated to be in the GES.
That was originally set up because the original new courthouse design required us to relocate. And that was our relocation. I think we're looking back as a whole at where that new courthouse is gonna go, and it's potential we might not even have to relocate until we actually engage with the firm to decide best spot for the new court that's coming up in the future. That may be able to just go back into the fund, potentially.
Okay, I think those are the big numbers, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anything else for Mr. Foster?
One other thing. So, the county owns property here in the courthouse, where eventually we're gonna need for part of the courthouse complex, right? And so, part of that is that there will have to be some demolition work done there. Is that the kind of thing that's contemplated here, is that just come out of operating funds?
That has not been addressed, and again, until I think we have a final design on where the new court would go, some buildings might not, that originally thought we needed demolition. The 2 properties we purchased on the front, the doctor's office and the service center,
Right.
depending on where the new court sits, I think it's potential that they may get renovated or repurposed, or they may get, that's kind of,
Still,
but there's not money set aside in this right here to demolish or to renovate. If that's answering the question.
Well, depending on when we're thinking about the courthouse, I mean, that whole area is gonna have to be looked at, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So whether it's, I'm not saying what to do, but yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I think at that point we'll have a better idea of how much we need to put in going forward in the 5-year CIP.
So one real quick, were there things that you thought you wanted or needed that did not make this list?
No, this is a good list.
So this is a whole list.
The only, I guess, and I understand the budget has to balance, but the Central High School, we had requested a little more in that, and I understand it has to balance, but they're out of parking on any program day right now, so we're asking for a little more to address additional parking out there, and also we realize we don't have any real ADA access to the new ball fields we've created. It was to try to address, hopefully with the 100, we can at least address some parking and the ADA portion of it. That's why it says ADA only, but additional funding there could certainly be used if that was available out at the complex.
Other than that, this is the full scope of all the,
Yes, sir, I think this is good.
and then you don't need to answer this question, but if we only have 6 million instead of 6.6, you know where you're talking about if you have to, right?
Yes, sir.
You don't need to tell us, but.
Yes, sir, we can tighten it up if we have to, yes, sir.
Just like that, kind of thinking, if you had extra, what would you do with it? If you had not enough, how would you manage it? So,
Understood.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just keeping on the Central High School theme, I know we've got a big outlay in 34, because a lot of that building still needs to be renovated. It'd be interesting to see if we could look, if we could sort of get our way there. And maybe, you know, it's such a popular complex, and it's such a great, the citizens love it, and, you know, we've got that room sitting there, is there a way to like break that up to maybe bring it, some of that, do piecemeal?
Right, and Ms. Kronberg can speak to the fact that on full program days, I believe there is no parking out there right now. It's completely full, so to renovate and to try to add more programs, we really need to address where we're gonna park everybody.
Great point. Great
Yes,
point.
sir.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your
Oh, thank you. Yeah, don't want to be rude, but my son's graduating from the fire academy. I need to be down in Hamilton to watch him do that. So thank y'all for your time.
All right, so we'll jump to Parks and Rec, but I do want to, before we get into that, explain, when we were looking at just the FY '24, we did cut a few projects. Not necessarily much from Scott's, because as you can see, most of it is recurring, and it's just maintenance that needs to happen. But as we go, there will be other that you'll see, or we can talk to the department heads that did have requests. Most of those were just pushed to FY '25, or pushed further out. And I'll let Jessica come up here and talk about her few projects that she has, not much to speak of, 767,000 over the next 5 years.
Okay, so obviously there's not a ton in here specifically for Parks and Rec, but I did want to discuss especially next year's project. As you know, we've had an ongoing project up here at the Capuchin Sports Complex. We're in new lighting, we're just doing some field rehab up there. And this 22,000 is to complete the ball field renovation there. The guys have been working their best, but it desperately needs to be renovated. This would change it over from a dirted field to a grassy field, address some irrigation issues, do some laser grading to fix any safety issues we have at that facility as well. So that is what the ball field maintenance is for the 22,000.
Do we not have any Parks and Rec dollars assigned for Courthouse Village and Centerville Village plans?
Specifically allocated to the plans themselves?
Yeah, I mean.
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay.
I do foresee that once the plans are completed, there will be an opportunity for the board to have some discussions based on working to carry out some of the implementation steps or recommendations, whether that's based on connectivity for sidewalks, bikes, whether it's improving existing trails. As the courthouse area primarily has a trail network.
I'm thinking as a, enhancing the attractiveness of
Correct.
those as residential and commercial corridors, so.
Correct.
So something.
What about the skate park? Is that under your budget? for the skate park?
That is, so, kind of a little bit of both. So a lot of our projects are very intertwined with what General Services does. So I believe that he had that listed under his budget, but we have, so we've been working with a local Friends of Vision Parks. They're working to raise some money directly towards skate park renovations as well.
And Mr. Lumpkins, that's an example of something that was requested, but we did not include in FY '24. If they can come, if Scott can come to a happy medium on providing, I think they do need to finish phase one to a certain level, but I don't think the decision was made to go to phase two and spend that kind of money. I think it was $150,000, just because our pot of money was $100,000. So that was on John Block. He is still working on it though. He can pay out of operating funds if he needs to.
The East End Trails, $1 million, elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
Previously funded, it doesn't have a fiscal year attached to it, so this is.
So that may be more of an so that project was actually moved to transportation, what, 3 years ago?
Ish.
Right.
So the 1.004 million that's up there now is funding that the county had assigned both proffer funds and similar type funds when we had the TAP application that was in the VDOT oversight. That project's been removed from VDOT oversight. That project currently stands in a decision for staff to finalize some alignment to better, I think, meet the comp plan goals of connectivity with the trail system itself. The goal is to not include the FY27 $100,000 she has up there, but the money we currently have is all we want to spend on the project, and ideally we allocate no more. The $1 million we have, Carla has the actual number somewhere, but less than $100,000 has been spent, so we have over $950,000 in cash in hand sitting on that project that we can use for construction.
Okay, at my recent town hall, one of the questions was asked if we had just abandoned that project, because there hasn't been a lot of visible progress. And I know we talked about phasing it. I know eventually it'll go from Route 6 all the way up to Broad. It's going to take us quite a while to get there. And I know we had to get easements through all the properties between the two.
Right.
And I know we had funding issues, and should we manage it ourselves, or should we have that? So if you could let me know how I should answer the question that comes up of, did we abandon it, and where does it stand?
Just tell them.
It's been, the phrase abandonment may have been used incorrectly by staff, that it's been VDOT, it's been abandoned from a VDOT oversight standpoint.
Yes.
We as a county have not abandoned it.
Correct.
It's very, ideally, we have plan approval by the end of this calendar year. I'd like to see bids for construction early 2024 and construction in the next couple of years. Easements still have to be done. That's, the alignment may or may not be changing, so we're trying to figure that part out as well.
So the total project is, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles? How many miles have you
Give or
built so
take, it's
far?
about 5 to 6 miles.
And how
The
much is
first
complete so far?
0% complete.
Okay, this is why the citizens are going to stop.
The current phase one is 1.5 miles as currently designed. And the price tag is approximately that $1 million price tag.
So when $1 million runs out and we're a third of the way there, then what?
It's about finding more sources of funds through transportation funding sources, potentially transportation alternatives that we tried to fund the first phase with. So it's prioritizing those funds for that aspect.
So we really only have the funding for a third of it. We haven't constructed any of it yet.
Correct.
We'll leave a basket by the door on your way out, give generously. You can see why citizens are scratching their head a little bit. Bids that phase one construction, we think may or may not start in fiscal '25.
So the plan is to get solicit bids mid-fiscal year '24, ideally. It's very much contingent on easements. We have verbal agreements with property owners for easements based off the current alignment. We have contracted with and paused the consultant, the surveyor, to draw up said easements. They're ready to do so if the alignment does not change. And then obviously process them accordingly with the county attorney's office.
I like to under-promise and over-deliver. So how do I under-promise on this one? It's going to be 5 years? Yeah. Anyway, never mind. We'll talk about that offline. I don't want to drill any deeper on this. I really just wanted a general update so I can answer that question from the town halls. I have the answer I think I need at this point, and we'll talk about the rest of it later.
Okay.
So I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Is that the first locally administered project we're doing?
It was going to be the first locally administered project with VDOT oversight. We've removed VDOT oversight, so we don't have any locally administered projects with VDOT.
Does that still count on our VDOT dashboard then, or?
We are 0 for 1, because we removed federal funding that was tied to the project.
So does that still go on our dashboard as a?
Correct. We are 0 for 1 on the dashboard.
Last thing, the citizens are very excited about this, and they can't wait. Just throw that in there. They've been told time and again it's coming, so.
Hey, anything else?
Happy to answer any of the questions you have on Parks and Rec.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are spring registrations going?
Fantastic. Very, very busy.
Would we like to move to education? All right, we'll start there.
Whatever you say.
So a lot of this discussion happened in public. You were all here, revolving around the 15 million in funding for Goshen Elementary School. A lot of other projects that were originally requested in '24 were pushed back to future years. As you can see, FY '26 is really large. We're gonna have to figure out, really prioritize and work closely with the schools on all of the costs that were put in FY '26. But what FY '24 proposes is the 15 million, some HVAC additions to the Goshen High School, some routine maintenance upgrades to Randolph Elementary, and same with Bird Elementary School. These are old buildings, and I think this was a HVAC upgrade, things like that. But I'll let Mr. Rayleigh come up and speak to this.
Good afternoon, thank you. Yeah, this, what you see in FY '24 per Mr. Carpenter's recommendation is aligned with what I shared with you last week and was prioritized, I think, when we were together in January. The $3.5 million at Goshen High School, or that facility is now 20 years old. You know, 1,400 students and staff that occupy that space, and so we have some significant replacements of HVAC that need to be done for life cycle. And then Bird Elementary School and Randolph Elementary School, that is electrical switchgear that is original to the school. So again, from a life safety standpoint, the importance of replacing that electrical switchgear.
So how do we go from 5 million to 24 million? How is that funded?
That's on the second slide. It's not funded. It's not. FY '26 is our outlier year where we're gonna have to, like I said, work closely with the schools. They're the bulk of our FY '26 requests, and figure out priorities. I know when we were discussing Goshen Elementary, you had alternatives for high schools, what did and didn't need to happen. This would be the pie in the sky plan, but because we're getting so much funding for Goshen Elementary, we can opt to do this at the Goshen High School. So all of those original figures are still included in the 20 million. I don't think final decisions have been made on downgrades, we'll call them. But yeah, FY '26 for education, this is not funded. So what I did in preparing the 5-year is FY '24 is fully balanced. FY '25 through '28 includes all requests from departments, which with the exception of FY '26, we can get there.
And then 26, the 20.237768, that number, that's not one project, right? That's a collection of projects?
Also Goshen High School renovations.
Yeah, the 20.
Yes, but it's, I mean, Dr. Bailey, is it, I guess what's behind that?
20,237,68 is a combination of two things at Goshen High School. It's 17,543,945 for this 30,000 square foot CTE addition, and it's $2.7 million for interior renovations, fine art spaces, music spaces, and just some other renovations that were identified in the 2017 study. So it's all for the high school complex.
Okay, so majority of it really is the relocation of the tech.
Yes, sir.
17 out of 20.
Yes, sir.
And no renovation might be better term, maintenance and upkeep. Is that fair?
Well, we're actually taking space.
Yeah.
What, no, the no renovation line,
Oh,
that's
Yes.
just
That's your
maintenance and upkeep.
recurring. Yeah,
Recurring,
that's your
okay, I
recurring.
just, so they're not mutually, it's not as if we didn't do the additions, you would lose, you know, or if we did do the additions, you would lose the above line. They're happening. They need to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, so for example, in the no renovations line, you're looking at $1.2 million and some additional HVAC. So over the course of the next 4 or 5 years at that complex, we're just trying to phase it appropriately based on age of equipment and need.
So is this color coded like the other ones?
It's not, education is the only one.
Your maintenance versus,
Yeah.
have that.
So, I guess I'm looking to my folks that have been here longer than I have. Would we, I don't feel good about approving something I have absolutely no idea how to fund. Again, I know that it's, but usually we have, oh, we're gonna issue bonds, or we have some sort of plan, and especially we'll have a new board in 2026 to go, oh, by the way, here you go.
Typically in the past, we appropriate 1 year, that's
Mhm.
24. We plan for a second year, that's 25. And in the past, we've made at least a good faith effort attempt to balance the first 5 years of a 25-year plan, but felt it was important to know everything that's out there that might come around the corner in year 6 or 7 or 8. That's kind of been the general approach. We've got some lumpiness here recently with a new courthouse, a new GES. Yeah, it's kind of lumpy. It's a big move through the snake. It's whatever analogy you want to use. It's, but yeah, the GES, courthouse, a couple of firehouses, and relocation of that. Where these are major projects that we've taken on. And so there's going to need to be some thought given to smoothing out some of the lumpiness. But we don't appropriate 5 years, we appropriate 1, and then things change year over year, but another year we'll have new information. And how we get there, what we find, what the priorities are, how much resources we have. FY '26 ends like in June of 4 years from now. So we don't try too hard, but we just have to have some idea. So now we know that we have some bonds that we can issue to cover public safety and some for schools. And so there is some capacity there. The other thing is that as our budget and inflation increases our budget, the GO bonds that we did issue are a fixed payment for 20 years. No floating rate, it's not. And the net fixed payment for 20 years will shrink as a percentage of the budget as the budget grows. So if the budget inflation grows at 8 to 10%, that creates some unused capacity as a percent of our budget to be able to issue bonds, perhaps at a premium, to bring in enough money to cover some of this. But right now, it's not fully funded. So I would focus on the appropriation year and the planning year, and have some idea that in the future, we may have to look for sources or uses that may help us overcome some of this. But you're not being asked to approve a number that you can't fund 3 years from now. I mean, that's.
We would have loved to bring a completely balanced 5 years. I know that's the goal, but we do have so many large projects. I just felt like who are Vic and I to decide this goes, let's keep this one, you know? I mean, they're all needs from the departments, so I just wanted, and especially this 20 million, I just wanted to put that in front of you as a request by the schools and other departments.
So we should have an odd strategy.
That's right.
And then, I'm guessing it wouldn't show up on CIP because I'm looking through the fire, but we have a large need, just assuming fire station gets approved. You're looking for 24 staff, and what year is that, Chief?
So that would be FY '25 is what we're looking at, trying to hire that staff.
Okay.
But it's all has to be coordinated with when that.
And that would be that would show up in operations right now.
That's not,
CIP.
that's
I'm just trying to, because that was a significant number, adding, I thought it might have been 26, which for me, even though it worked.
Yeah, you're right. Something to think about.
Okay.
Luckily, we do have in the fire rescue, the order for fire engine, so got that covered. Because when we do go to staff that, we also have to provide apparatus.
Yep, okay.
Anything else to add?
Just so it is on record, I'm a huge fan of bones we couldn't get to the CTE now or earlier, because I think that's, I'm such a fan, and I think the country needs it more than anything.
Mr. Schoonhauer, there's some calculus in that because of the priority that the community has placed on CTE, that we have left that there for consideration. Many of the other projects that were part of the bond have been pushed out several more years. For example, auxiliary gymnasiums and some of the other things that are impacted because of the priority this community has placed on CTE. This time last year was an FY25 request, but we did push it back to FY26 just because of project management and a variety of other factors that have been discussed publicly. I will say before we leave that the new GES project is really on a very positive trajectory right now. The school board has taken an action last week and will take action again tonight to reduce the overall contract with Shockey as a result of direct purchase programming. And then we had some allowances that were built into the site prep, and we only tapped into $5,000 of those allowances, and we have a significant dollar amount that's left in those allowances. So although we had some challenges on the front end with the costs associated with developing that site, we have not run into rock, we have not run into soils that are concerning to us, and so we're in a very positive place right now with the current level of construction.
It's great.
Dynamite contingency may not.
It's not looking that way.
Money back to the county.
Just to add on to Mr. Schoonhauer's comments, does the CTE expansion factor in enhancements, modernization? I mean, like really producing graduates who are at the forefront with a new facility and doing those things.
The vision that we had in 2017 will be different than the vision when 2025 design happens, I believe. Right now, it's priced at a 30,000 square foot addition. We haven't programmed the space inside because of changes that will happen in the workforce in future years.
Mr. Chairman, I just come back to, I mean, like, I share your uneasiness with having numbers staring at us that are really big. A couple of months ago, this chart looked like a little different, that the 40 million that's in the purple, right next to that was 15, and 15 would cover most of that 20, a couple of months ago. And so the 15 got moved from the 20 over to the green, leaving that 20 still staring at us. But we all feel it's so important, we didn't want to abandon the project. But we've got something now we've got to wrestle with. And there was some discussion about can we take some of that 20 and use it for the 15. Right now, you're just showing the 15 and the 20. And it leaves us in a very uneasy place. But again, we didn't want to abandon it, and we also didn't want to abandon GES, so that's how we just where we are. But I share your uneasiness.
Well, I think this is showing as we go through these budgets, we see what's on top. It's what we said in this room a few months ago. We all support this. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
We're going to be sacrificing, but that's what the citizens said. That was the priority. So we're realizing that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
All right, we've also included $1 million more towards the courthouse in FY24. So we've previously funded with local dollars $1.5 million. We're going to give another $1 million this year, and I think this will be used a little bit for the studies that are going on. FY26 is when we're showing the borrowing of the funds and the actual construction beginning, those larger payments coming out. So you'll see the $1.5 million that's been previously funded plus the next 5 years will total $28 million. And like I said, we all know it's probably going to cost higher than that, but this is what we're planning for.
Can you just refresh everybody on the unused, unissued bond referendum amounts for public safety, which this is part of, and or the schools? We had a $96 million authorization of the referendum, and it was broken down between public safety and schools.
Yes, we had 40.8 issued to the schools and 8.2 issued to public safety.
Okay, so 40 issued to the schools out of 50?
Yes.
Out of 60.
Out of 60.
So you still have 20 left?
Right, that's why.
No, we only.
No.
I'm sorry. I think was your question. I apologize. Was your question how much we've already? Because we've already only accessed 50 million.
I should have brought this with me.
That's it.
I feel a lot better if I didn't.
Well, going in, the 96 was a par value authorization for the referendum.
Yep.
And then we've issued 59 bonds,
Right.
which is broken down roughly 42 and 8.
Yeah, 40.8 and 8.2.
Okay. And out of that 96, the breakdown of schools and public safety from the original authorization, bond referendum was 60 and 36?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So 60 of the bond referendum is for schools, for education. And out of that 60, we've only issued 42. So there's roughly 18 left to issue,
Yes.
which could be available to cover that 20. So there's where the lion's share of that 20. And on the public safety side, we issued 8 out of the 36,
Right.
which would leave 28
Right.
available for this, and plus or minus any premium that may or may not be available to cover shortfalls on those.
Right.
And then, of course, the 8 that was issued already for the fire station, there may be cost overruns there too, of $1 million or $2 million, depending.
Right. And we do still have just short of $1 million from our premium to put towards that.
So
That
they-
premium really helped out there.
There's just short of $1 million of unused premium, most of them went to the schools, but there's $1 million. So that 8 might have another, little less than $1 million, so it could be 9, and maybe another little overrun over that. But bottom line is, we've got the vast majority of the funding for all those projects, at least identified or earmarked, as long as cost of projects don't go up, as long as
Right.
interest rates don't skyrocket.
And we've been smart by putting local dollars in several years before the project even begins. So that's really
Planning for
nice.
it.
Like doing it.
That was smart. Oh, did I say that last? Is that out loud? Is that us?
We've been smart. Yeah, that was good advice.
Any questions on judicial?
I just have one real quick one on the courthouse. It is the new construction of the courthouse building, but that does encompass everything. All the planning for it, the tearing down buildings, all those things that go into this is it. At least what we know right now.
That's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
In 2 or 3 years out, 26, when if push comes to shove, there may or may not be some ability to phase that project in or not, depending on how much is available and what cost of construction is, that kind of thing, or just, I don't think throwing that in. Anyway, years to have that kind of discussion, but I know it's a fairly comprehensive project with a lot of relocation,
There's a lot.
there's a lot of pieces and parts to it, land acquisition, and so some of that may or may not be able to bleed over into another year if we needed some time or space.
Tara, were you gonna say
Yeah,
something?
I need to know what Tara's thinking over there.
Oh, I'm sorry. There goes my poker face. I just may have been under misapprehension, but I think when we had a number that it wasn't particularly detailed. I didn't think there was a number for demolition and a number for site and a number for grading.
Right.
All of, this is the number, but it doesn't necessarily include, this is all there is to spend.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it's an estimate that included all of that
Right,
stuff.
I got you, okay.
So I just, when you said that, I mean, it's clear that that's what there is to spend. But I think if you were left with the impression that that's a detailed number of all the component parts, no ma'am.
Well,
No,
because
I
it
think
is a
that's-
couple years out, so it's not,
Right, and it's been, I mean, we had to do the referendum and come up with a number several years ago.
Right.
So it is a generic number of an amount,
Right.
but it is
Based
not
on that, that's-
composed of knowledgeable expenses.
oh, cool.
We hope it
That
encompasses
makes sense.
everything you just said.
Yeah.
I doubt it will, but that's the plan.
So
What she said.
there's a number of pieces, each piece hasn't been costed out
Yeah,
yet.
I
We do
get it.
know there's a number of pieces that could or could not
I
be
get
put
it.
together differently.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, fire rescue. This is one of our bigger ones. I know Eddie's in the room.
Eddie's in the room.
Eddie's in the room.
Oh.
Before Eddie starts, I also want to add that we originally had Whitehall Station, Station 8, as an FY '24 funded project. We put it on, we took it off, we put it on, we took it off. It's not on currently. It could be if, we're relooking at our revenues right now for general operating fund. I think our initial projection was lower than what the economy is looking like now, so we're reevaluating those. If that's a project that we do want to fund, I did want to mention that, and Eddie can give more detail, but the owner of the parcel to the southwest of that piece on the map, where Dogtown Road and Whitehall Road connect, where this Station 8 would be, has offered the county first dibs at the piece of land. They're selling it right at market value, which is under $200,000. If that's a purchase that the county wants to make, I think now would be a good time to jump on it. Whether we do the temporary station or just wait until we build the big station in FY '29.
So that's the property where, at the corner?
So that would be the
Yes.
property that would be south on Dogtown Road, the little brick house that joins it on Dogtown Road to the south. We have two
So
parcels.
southeast.
Right, we have two parcels presently. We have the parcel that contains the brick rancher, and then we have a parcel that we purchased from Dr. Bowles. And the two parcels connect, but they don't square up. And then to the down Dogtown Road, we were approached by the property owner. The property owner stopped by Fire Rescue Administration, with a death in the family. They were looking to sell the property and at assessed value, which we channeled it up to Mr. Carpenter's office so that he would be aware of that. One reason that could be a good idea is we've actually done some studies on the property. We engaged Timmons, looking at whether or not we could do something temporary on the property. And because the property doesn't square up perfectly, some of the road frontage is a little bit challenged, and we have two intersections that we have to be concerned about. One is Dogtown and Whitehall, and the other is 522 and Whitehall. And so some folks thought that it would be good to get that piece of property at the intersection of Whitehall and 522. However, I think that's a major intersection, and there would be even more line of sight type restrictions. So it is possible that the fire station may have to exit out to Dogtown Road in order to avoid the hill and also to achieve the greatest distance from one of the two intersections, unless they're the two intersections. So I don't really know firmly the answer to that, but I was surprised when the property owner stopped in 5 Admin and offered to sell that piece of property that adjoins that property. One of the challenges that we figured out with doing anything temporary on the property, if we were to construct a metal building that we had talked about to a garage, a fire engine, and ambulance, it's difficult right now to position that building so that it wouldn't be in the way of construction for the new fire station, according to Timmons. And it could be done. They're willing to continue to look at that, but the goal would be, if we did anything temporary, we'd use the house as living quarters, a temporary structure, the garage, a fire engine, and ambulance, but not to impede the construction site for the new fire station. We wouldn't want to tear that down and disband operations. So that's what we're looking at. The property offer just kind of came our way impromptu. So as Carla has indicated, it was channeled up to the county administrator's office.
So give that some thought, and if that's something you think would be a smart purchase for now, even though the construction of that firehouse isn't out until, what is it, 32, 35?
Well, actually, it's been showing up in FY 28. Yeah, but it's not on this one here. So
You're
but
right.
that's y'all's choice as to how you want to do that. If you'd like, I could provide the board the information on the information we collected when we were contacted by the property owner. Take a look at it. It's got acreage and some stats and so forth of the area view of it.
Is there a line item in here? We have the West Creek station, so we don't have 8 just for the temporary structure? Because I feel like if we leave, I'd like to, we had it planned and then stuff happened and we're not able to do it now. But I'd like to, I would obviously prefer to have it on there when we're doing the temples to phase 1.
District 2 has a lot of needs at this meeting.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of underserved community.
She can throw the word.
And you just need to front load, kind of like we've done with the other projects, to start putting local funding into that line for when we do the full
Or to
construction.
say like, hey, we're gonna target having a temporary metal building there. I'll just say, just throw two cents.
Is that what she was just talking about? It creates an issue possibly? Is that,
We're not 100% certain. The 9 million was showing up previously in last year's CIP. The 9 million showed up in FY '28 for the entire project. And again, you know, Timmons seemed to believe they could make it work, but it wouldn't be in the way that we thought it could work. The metal building would be further from the residential structure that's there today. And it would be very close to that property line that adjoins this other piece of property. I don't know, again, I don't know what precipitated the contact the citizen made. Could be that the time of their personal situation, no longer seeing folks on the property, looking at the property, they approached the county and just said, hey, I'd be willing to sell to you at assessment value.
Could we pick this up at a 2x2 in a future
Yep.
meeting?
Yes.
If it makes sense, absolutely we should.
I'll forward you the preliminary information that we have
Great catch.
after this meeting is over.
then back to your point though, should we put something somewhere for, you know, company aid, something?
Right, the temporary.
I mean, 100,000, I mean, I don't know, something. Because we know we're gonna do something there.
We have a sign.
We'd like to see it. We'd like to see it on the CIP. Carl has worked very hard to get where we are, but we also have citizens who have an expectation because there's a sign up and they're expecting a fire station.
Just take the sign
We can afford to take the sign down.
$200 and it might have inside the rule.
And another extra thought to go with that is, one of the reasons it was pulled from FY '24, aside from the reasons Eddie said, is because it also needs to come with staffing, and an apparatus. So it's a lot of additional costs aside from the structure itself. Not to say we can't include it, we can definitely start.
If we could do nothing else but, you know, so, you know, show some money put aside. Be a placeholder, I don't care what it is, you know, just something, so let's just don't abandon it.
Yeah. Oh, it's not abandoned, it's done.
No, I mean,
It's on the
that's
longer
probably
term
the wrong
list.
word, I mean, we used that word earlier.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
Put it
but
on the
let's
back.
just don't forget it.
Yeah.
And it maybe there's some renovations to the house that might be done, maybe there's just, I don't even know. Right.
They made those recommendations. We have a pretty comprehensive report that they prepared for us.
Right. So is Timmons.
Yeah, just now.
The one after that, I think we talked about was possibly relocating to.
Station 2 in
Yes.
Crozier. Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Because it's got 180 degrees on the river, so it has a response of 180 degrees
Right.
instead of 360. But that relocation, presumably a relocation wouldn't come with a whole other 25 member staffing.
So actually,
Whereas this
the
one might have wood.
present FY '23 CIP does have $400,000 in it for land acquisition for Crozier Fire Station 2 somewhere down Caldwell Road. I'm not sure that that's a project that we've been actively pursuing. I know there's a local real estate agent there in the Crozier area who knows the folks along Caldwell Road, who would be willing to pick that up and see what's possible. But that money is in this year's CIP, and I'm not sure if it's been redirected or whether it's still there or not, so I'm not sure.
Okay, one of the reasons I bring it up, adding 7 and 8 is a lot of people. It's a lot of staff and full-time career firefighters. Relocating 2 doesn't come with that kind of demand with it. So I leave it to you to decide what the priorities are and what stations.
Well, let's see, Fire Station 2 in Crozier, I know it gets confusing with District 2. I'll start calling District 2 Sandy Hook. The Fire Station 2 in Crozier, if the land were purchased this year, the actual money for the fire station rebuild isn't showing up until FY 32, I think it is. FY 32.
I've got something.
It's a good ways out.
There you go.
There you go.
All right.
That's like the longer out of the big projects we've got coming up.
Where is this, the Crozier Fire Station?
Yes, sir. So when we looked at,
So this is not showing the new Crozier.
so
I don't
that's
see
what,
it on here either.
right, so what this is would be actually, stations that would be in addition to the ones that we have today. And that is, these stations are in our 25-year CIP and have been for several years. There's a Matthews Road Fire Station there at Matthews and Whitehall or in the vicinity of that location, as well as something in the Oilville area. We fully expect the Oilville area to develop and require closer services. And then, of course, the one that's the furthest out is the Rockcastle Fire Station, which you all know is a very rural area in the county. Probably will be for many, many years to come.
Internet.
We get internet, we change everything.
The relocation's not there.
The relocation is not there, but the land, $400,000 for land acquisition is in this year's, the FY '23 CIP, so possibly, possibly that could be carried over, right? If we didn't find a piece of property. that
Would
was
you want to use that to build a facility at Whitehall?
Well, I think it's all mapped out, and it's one need is as great as the other. You figure that.
But your Cardwell Road was further down than Sandy Hook.
It is, and that was exactly Mr. Carpenter's point when he saw that. He thought maybe that 400,000 could be used to assist with some other project that's upon us, as opposed to. I think the timing of land is just really going to be centered around timing. If you find the right piece of land, the right seller, and for the right amount.
But you said we're not really actively, you're not sure how actively
Not that
we're
I'm
looking.
aware of. I mean, no more than the word of mouth that's out in the community. Community members are aware, but there's no broker or there's no real estate group that I'm aware of that's actively pursuing the
You know
property.
what, Mr. Chairman, just thinking out loud here, but rather than dive too deep into your current plan, I believe you're looking at your plan and developing plans. So maybe
We are at a master plan.
maybe we have to kind of give birth to that.
Yes, sir.
Do a little deeper dive.
That'd be fine.
To advance.
That 200,000 you're talking about, and if I'm putting two and two together, it sounds like that parcel is strategic. I mean, from what you said, that
It
200,000.
would appear it is based on what we know today and I've learned about the property.
I think it would be a
Can
smart
county
business.
administration make the offer, close it, do all that? I mean, we don't have to do a vote or anything, something like that.
We
Yeah,
do,
it's
We would.
to appropriate the funds, we would.
Yeah.
Could they make an offer to at least
Oh,
get a position on it so that
An
we?
offer can be made without board action, without five-member action.
Okay. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud in terms of somebody wanting, I wouldn't want to sit on it for 2 board meetings or something like that in the current residential real estate market.
That's gonna try to maybe.
Yeah,
see
yeah,
if
nice.
So I'll make sure I send that to you at the conclusion as well as the 10-minute report on the existing.
And ideally, if that purchase winds up saving us money because of engineering and, not having to, that'd be huge in our decision.
Yeah, the 2 intersections is kind of what caught my attention in line of sight distances that VDOT may require, which one is the more expensive than the other. Okay, as far as the fire rescue CIP, beyond the large building projects that we've been discussing, the bulk of money in our CIP is with apparatus. And back to the building projects, because of inflation and because of the numbers that we're working with, we've become to realize that those numbers do not include apparatus. And so, once we thought it would, now we know it probably is underfunded to include apparatus. So we have the apparatus in our CIP to be able to address fire stations 7 and 8, as well as the aging fleet of apparatus. And I'll start with the ambulances. We usually maintain a fleet of 10 ambulances. We have 9 today. We rotated 1 out because of age and maintenance costs. And we're hoping to get that back up to 10 ambulances. But even with the new ambulances that we've received recently, which have really made a huge impact, the average mileage per vehicle per ambulance is still 90,000 miles. And the average age per vehicle is just still under 5 years old. And so looking at the West Creek Station, we need an ambulance, and potentially Sandy Hook, and new replacement units. And we have 1 ambulance in the CIP per year. The same thing can be said about fire engines. And of course, the fire engine is quite a bit more expensive than the ambulance is. And we have a 12% inflation factor that goes from year to year based on what we're being told, based on today's inflation numbers. And if that changes for the better, then that's a good thing. But we're looking at our fire engines. We have one fire engine that was purchased new in 2001, and we have 5 that were purchased new in 2006 and another in 2008. And we do have a fire engine that we are receiving next month that will cover one of those fire engines that was replaced, that was bought new in 2006. And we don't plan to get rid of any fire engines because we don't have a reserve fleet, and we find ourselves quite often strained because too many engines are in the shop at one time beyond our control. And so that's our goal, is to try to maintain the engines we have a couple of reserve engines. And so we have the fire engines in there going forward. There are tankers, fire tankers in the budget as well. All but one of our tankers was purchased new in 2002. The tanker is the probably of the vehicles in the fire service in general, the tanker is the one that carries the most load of water, and also can be the most dangerous because of brakes and suspension and so forth. So we did purchase one new tanker. It's at Station 5. We have another new tanker on order that we should get in the summer of '24. And this would address 2 of the remaining 4 tankers that also were purchased in 2002. Beyond that, in the CIP, some things that we no longer have in there. We no longer have the fire and life safety house. That was a roughly $100,000 item for fire and life safety education for the children. We'll look for other ways to fund that. Possibly there may be grants that we could look at and help with that. And the other is you guys have been very good to us with the Fire Training Center, and then we've been very conservative going forward with the Fire Training Center, thinking that what's been awarded and what's available, we'll get that back into the kind of condition we need to continue to use that for the next however many years it ends up being before.
Live fire and classrooms and the whole.
Yes, sir. The classroom is on order. It'll be here in April, and we are in the process of procuring the live fire structure. The grant money is good, firmed up. We've been through many levels of approval of red tape from the state, but I feel confident that we are good on the $480,000 that they awarded us over a year ago. And I'd be happy to answer any particular questions on any other items you see in the CIP.
I see a ladder replacement in 2033. It does say, but I know we've got it's at Station 1, is it not? That's considerably more expensive than a engine replacement.
It is.
Yeah, but is that contemplated? Would we need one at West Creek? Well, that's what I'm getting to.
I don't believe so. I think we need one in the east end of the county.
Okay.
We believe that the ladder positioned at Fire Station 1 in Mannequin can serve the east end of the county. We plan to operate with a second ladder in the courthouse area. We've always had a ladder in the courthouse area since 1993. And the good news is we have one of those on order, and we'll receive a ladder in August of 2024 that will replace the 1993 ladder truck to the courthouse.
So that went in the previous budget, okay.
Right, it was ordered last May. And so the thought is that looking at all the way out to FY33, at that point, if the economy is good and the county's financial position is good, we could replace one or the other, but we would actually gain a reserve ladder truck at that particular time. But I don't see, unless there's something that is constructed in the West Community County that I'm not aware of today, I feel like the 2 ladder trucks will serve the county well for many years to come.
Any questions for Chief Ferguson?
Until you build a high-rise farm. Just checking.
Chief, thank you for treading lightly on 26. That's our problem here. I made room for education, public safety, and courthouse. So thank you.
We'd like to thank Mrs. Cave, who's done an extraordinary job with this. She's worked closely with us, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
So we have about 30 minutes, so how are we doing on time?
Well, it depends on how the funding situation, how that discussion goes, but we're getting through. We've got IT, sheriff, which is very small, and utilities. We want to keep rolling the way we are.
Please.
Okay, all of IT is routine, upkeep. There's really no new exciting projects. Randy had requested a few that got nixed, unfortunately. I won't say nixed, I'll say pushed out. The pictometry, I'll let him explain that. That was a request for 2024. But yeah, I'll let him go with this one.
Yeah,
You ready?
Ready?
I got, as was instructed, trying to keep a lean CIP, so really the only thing that got up in FY '24 was the network equipment replacement upgrade line item. It's usually 25, it went to 175, and that is because we were notified by Cisco that 2 of our core routers, the brains of our network, the one here at admin and one at ECC, are end of life next fiscal year. So we really, if we don't replace them, we can't get support on them any longer. So something breaks. It's a bad situation. They have redundancy built into them locally on so that's why that one went up. Everything else, like she said, got pushed out. The pictometry was a request that came from the assessor's office originally, and then you guys got involved in some other county departments, the sheriff's office, a couple other people. We researched it, we had a vendor in, and we were gonna ask for it this year, but we pushed it out a year, trying to keep things stuff. It's where they come in and they fly the county to get imagery. And we get that from the state for a certain cost for free, or a certain level for free, and then we pay some upgrades. That's in there too, for GIS area when we upgrade. The pictometry does what's called a side view, like if you're familiar with Google Street View of buildings and stuff, and allows us to get much more granular, doing dimensions and stuff like that. It would have a lot of good applications for the county if we don't get that, especially for the assessment. I'm here to answer any other questions you guys have, but everything else we try to keep flat, and the recurring fees, as Carla said.
How many of these Cisco routers do we have that you say are the key parts? You have 2, at least 2.
We have 2 main, what we call our core routers. We have a lot of other switches and smaller routers in off-network sites, but our 2 main ones are core, and they're the big routers that take up multiple rack space that have blades, what's called blades in them. And like I said, they have some redundancy in them, and they have redundant power supplies, and we keep spare blades around.
But you have 2 main ones, and those are end of life.
Those are end of life. We have over 70 or 80 switches and routers around the county.
But none are gonna touch the amount of cost that these 2.
These 2 do, correct. We keep the 25,000 per year to replace the smaller switches and routers as they become end of life or as they break or something like that.
So what is this level of support for a new router? How many years do they?
We've gotten, I looked it up before I came to this meeting, those 2 routers were put in place 9 years ago. So this will be the 10th year, and that's about the life cycle that Cisco will do support on before they say, no, we're not supporting them on it anymore, we're not gonna keep maintenance on them, we're not gonna do firmware upgrades, anything like that.
So I guess, does your 25,000 a year in the future, does that take into account your anticipated end of life of some of these other routers?
I don't know that I put in FY '34 that we may need to replace the 2 core routers again.
But I'm talking about all the others, because the smaller ones have end of life too, don't they?
Yes, but that 25 usually covers that.
Covers everything.
Yes, because they're a lot cheaper than the core.
Thank you.
So I know we were looking at where we are in the process of a new accounting system for treasurer. Is that, any of that go into your budget?
That's a different line item.
Okay, so that would be different, it's not part of your budget, okay.
But I'm not sure where. I think it would come out of your budget.
It may, but I'm not sure either. I don't see it.
Unless it's in operating, which it shouldn't be. I don't think that's.
I mean, I'm not quite sure I know where we are on the project, and maybe we haven't, we still haven't quite started maybe, or?
We put the RFP on the street. We have a team between myself, Mr. Revenue and Treasurer.
Right.
We've got to narrow it down.
got bids back, that was back in the fall. RFP went on the street. We got bids back in December. We've been evaluating those bids. We've got narrowed down to one vendor now. We had 4 people respond.
Oh, I know how that's funded. We put a lot of money into CIP when we switched to Tyler Munis, and we came way under budget then, and that money is still sitting in that line for new software.
Whose
So we're
department is that? Whose
purchasing,
department is that in?
it's in Brandy's budget, but it's a pre-existing line that rolls forward year to year.
So it's not shown here.
Yeah, because it's already funded, not a
It's
new
already
project.
funded. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's.
We're safe
But
there.
we
As
are-
long as
it's
we
in
did
there
talk about that
somewhere,
a while ago.
We are pretty far along in that RFP process to making a decision.
We funded ahead of time, that was smart.
So you're down to one, assuming everybody agrees, then we'll sign a contract with them and.
We have to make a decision by April 15th, I believe,
Okay.
based on the 120 days from when we got the RFPs, proposals back. So we have to make a decision by April 15th. If we move forward, then we start contract negotiations.
And once we agree and we're ready to start work, is that like a 2-year project, do you think? Or, I mean, just, I'm
I would say 12 to 18 months.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, just curious, I just want to get a sense.
Awesome, good questions.
All right, thank you.
Anything else for Randy? Thank you, Mr. Bowden.
All right, keep it rolling. Sheriff's Office, Major East wants to come up and talk, but there's very little, aside from vehicle replacement, there is a big project of a mobile command post, which would be nice to have in emergencies where they need to be out about $575,000 next year, for FY25.
And that would be part of West Creek. That would be a part of West Creek, would it not, or is
No,
this
this is
separate?
gonna be a boat command.
No, oh, I'm
big
sorry.
RV,
Oh,
which you
I'm
pay
sorry.
for. Yeah, place to place.
Is it a trailer?
It'll be like an RV style, mobile command post. So right now, we currently have a horse trailer we use for that, and we found about a month and a half ago that the heat and AC didn't work in that. So we're actually needing a larger vehicle for us as well as fire rescue use in major operations. And I think this talk really kind of took off. We had to protest a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that we needed somewhere to operate from that's not always in the same location at the EOC or the sheriff's office. So this kind of took form. We're looking at going with that route.
First transfer from the table.
Yeah.
They're afraid of mice too.
But back to his point though, in addition to this mobile and fixed current, is there monies being identified in the future for maybe a fixed ESET kind of presence with the firehouse?
So the discussion is within the West Creek Fire Station. I know we're still working, maybe a joint venture with Fire Rescue to build some sort of public safety wing on there for us to work out of. But again, as we always say, our guys work out of their car as their office. And they carry everything they need in their car when they respond to a house. They're going to bring their office to your house and call for help. So,
Right.
but we do want to have a location down there where somebody can come and meet an officer for a chat or interview or whatever.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, file paperwork, use restroom, whatever. But is that gonna be out there, budget?
Hopefully, it might be.
Well, I understand it's good talking about
She's
fire
still here,
rescue,
so,
but-
she's never sheriff, but she's still here.
Good neighbors.
That's a sheriff chief conversation.
Okay, all right, you guys can work that out, I'm sure, I just wanna make sure that we have some monies for you guys to work it out.
Yeah, and we don't need a whole, I mean, really, we just need space, that's the main thing, as long as we have space to occupy inside the building. And we kind of already share some space in Company 6 at Haydenville, and we just need a network connection, we just need an office, more or less. So
Right.
I think for the one down West Creek, we might do a little more in depth to say I haven't built it out yet, but.
And then, I don't know, if you think about fuel, refueling and whatnot too.
That's something,
Just maybe
yeah, this
easier.
conversation will be had.
Save you some time, effort.
Yeah.
Good.
Sounds good.
Good.
Any questions?
All right, we're done. Good job.
Everybody that's got vehicles has done the inflation factor except for general services. Might just go back. Because I saw the same thing Mr. Peterson brought up. Unless you are buying those vehicles,
There is discussion with Scott and Mr. Carpenter. I haven't decided on this yet, but we're getting there. If we get down the road with this, they're looking at leasing vehicles, which may come with a slight cost savings. But you're right, I mean, there will still be inflation. We'll need to build that in.
If you're buying the same number, because I'm watching to see everybody else has vehicle replacements, does have,
do.
does have that, so. Just to be consistent, I know we're not balanced in those out years, but we ought to be consistent.
And in case anybody is listening to this besides you all, because you all know this, utilities is not general fund money. This is, they raise their own money, they fund their own projects. And I'll let Matt speak on those.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the highlight of our CIP is obviously next year is fully funded already. So, the reason for that is we have two projects that have already been designed because we needed to take $1 million transfer to get our Eastern Goochland Forest Main project up and going. We pushed the two projects we have for FY24 into FY25. So just waiting for some of our cash flows to catch up. What funds our CIP fund is connection fees. So as people connect to the system, developers, or whoever pay connection fees, those go directly into our CIP fund. So that's where the money comes from. Every year we take a fresh look at this. The majority of these projects come from our master plan. So next year we'll start the second update of the master plan. So don't be surprised if some of these projects get juggled as some of the needs kind of get switched around as the county's grown in the past few years since our last master plan update. So, but that's currently where we stand. I guess I'll open it to you guys for any questions.
Matt, thanks for that. Now, the upgrade to the CEW, that's the corrections facility, sewer treatment.
Yes, that's a gravity sewer line that goes down to your corrections facility.
Okay, let me back up a second rather than jump ahead. In the past, we've had some discussions around some fairly sizable numbers that it would take to upgrade our capacity and the nutrient additions to that sewage treatment plant so that we could upgrade our capacity and we could use. And those were some fairly sizable numbers.
That's right.
Those aren't like 5-10 million. Those aren't anywhere here, obviously. Is that because they're out in the future, or because they're separately considered from this, or what? I mean, where are those?
So that's kind of twofold. Some of the original numbers done, I believe you're talking about the PER from like in 2016, somewhere around that time frame. Some of those numbers were using anticipated sewer demands that were eventually clawed back a little bit with another master plan update as the service area of the courthouse got better defined.
Okay.
So the projected demands that was being done in that PER, just to clarify, the PER is a preliminary engineering report, are no longer being planned for. Just because we have a more defined service area now, we know a little bit more about how the courthouse area is growing. So that's one reason those numbers will claw back a little bit. Because those anticipated future demands were reduced, we determined we could generally serve the courthouse, at least in the utility master plan planning period, by the capacity, the potential full build-out capacity of the Department of Corrections wastewater treatment plant. So right now, they're currently undertaking phase one. It's already under construction. That's what was funded in the previous year.
Okay.
Funding for that project was right around $2 million.
Okay.
That's already been appropriated to the Department of Corrections. They've got that project underway. That's for phase one.
Okay.
Phase one will increase our capacity from 136,000 gallons a day to 180,000 gallons a day. So, yeah. So phase two is essentially outfitting another reactor, and that's a much less cost because phase one is really building the foundation for phase two, which is the more expensive part. So we don't have a cost for phase two yet, but it should be less than 7 figures. But right now, phase two, because of permitting limitations with wastewater, the DOC doesn't currently want to go ahead with phase two because the capacity is just not yet needed. But when it is needed, the phase one is being designed and it's being constructed right now to where all they'll need to do is bring in equipment to outfit phase two.
Okay, so that, those scary kind of numbers are.
They went away a couple of years
They
ago.
went away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, we've talked about this before as well, but since we are almost totally reliant on that treatment plant, we don't have our own.
Correct.
That if they ever, for whatever reason, decide to close it down, we need to make sure that we preserve, that capacity. So whether it,
You have some agreements.
Yes,
we
we-
have some agreements with them, don't we?
We have several MOUs with the DOC, and we've worked that language in, that where we'll have basically first rights to purchase the asset.
So that's, without that, so thank you for that.
That's right,
Appreciate it.
absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now, I know this was supposed to end at 3:30, correct?
Yes, we were.
Scheduled to 3:30?
Yeah.
All right. Looking at funding these projects, FY '24 is fully funded. It's balanced, I feel comfortable with it. We've got a lot of debt, everything, there's a lot of pieces that go into funding FY '24, but everything is listed down here. The big piece is the GES funding. We looked really hard at prior year CIP projects that were funded, and some came in under budget, some never happened. We were able to come up with $481,000 we can put towards these new projects. Now, 25 through 28, if you focus on that general fund transfer line, 12 million in 25 and 27, and then 14 million in 28. We have typically been giving about 5 to 6 million a year. So that is a little higher, but also our revenues we're projecting a lot higher revenues in FY '24. All this to say, we need to continue to look for grants. We need to use our proffers where we can on certain projects. That's not allocated down below because I don't know those figures just yet. Any additional funds that we receive will lower our general fund transfer. But, yeah, as you know, we do quarterly projections. With those, we look at where we are within our financial policies. And we take this CIP plan year by year with funding, and we would never put a plan that you are expected to approve, like you were talking about earlier, with a $12 million transfer for general fund. But I don't think that we will require that. I think we'll be able to come up with other funding, just like we did for FY '24 with all of this.
So that 5.9 million general fund reserve, is that consistent with what we've been doing in the last year?
Yes. And I have put together, I know this might make everyone a little uneasy, but I also wanted to touch on, so if you look at FY '25 through '28, that does require 64 million in general fund reserves. But, as you know, we usually do return a pretty hefty surplus each year. I'm predicting over 5 million for FY '23 that will dump back into general fund. Our last 3 years were in FY '22, a little over 6 million. Before that was 3.4 million and 2.4 million. So, like I said in the beginning, we're gonna keep all of our policies in mind. And we may have to cut some of these year by year and reprioritize, relook at everything to make sure we can actually afford what we're doing and keep our general fund reserves at a healthy level. So, in looking at the 28 million that we need to borrow, I do think we're gonna stay below our debt policy, our debt ratio policy. The green is showing this includes the GO bonds, but this is showing the debt we have outstanding currently that's paid from the general fund. And the orange would include the new debt, but of course this is from an amortization schedule that we ran ourselves. It's assuming a 7% borrow rate. We don't know what the borrowing rate will be. It's assuming a semi-annual payment of interest once a year, principal over 20 years. And what that does is put us in FY '27, which would be that first initial principal payment. It puts us right up under our 10% goal. So that's a good thing. Assuming we needed to borrow additional debt, we do still have a little room for that. A smidgen for the school projects possibly, or any other large projects that we might need to borrow for.
Is policy effectively the AAA rating, or how do we, I mean, it seems, given where we project revenues to go, it feels like the absolute dollar amounts in the graph that you put together are not bleeding or, the coffers, so to speak. So I'm just trying to understand from a long-term perspective what thoughts to maintain AAA are and where those barriers are.
Sure. Those are all good questions. I'm trying to answer some of them here. Believe it or not, I think Virginia has more AAAs than any other state, because Virginia is a state that's from AAA, and if the state's not a AAA, it's hard for a county to get one. So it's important that the state keeps that AAA. But within Virginia, some of the other AAAs like Fairfax, with a $1 billion school budget and another $1 billion government budget, they could pay for 2 or 3 schools out of the coins and the seat cushions, whereas a county like ours, a new school is a major 20-year undertaking. So nominal dollars may be the same. I guess where I'm going is the larger you are, and the bigger your budget is, the less important any one facility, structure, or vehicle is. The smaller you are, the higher percentage of your budget you need, because to get those nominal dollars to cover an admin building or a school or event. So we have targets set for reserves that are larger than a Fairfax as a percent of budget, not larger in dollar terms, and we have more conservative debt as a percent of our budget than some of those other larger AAAs would be. So to your question is this good for AAA? Well, you have to put in the context of who we are as opposed to just generally, but in the context of who we are, I feel reasonably comfortable, and the agencies have already seen these kind of graphs for us, and have said, that's fine with us, you're a AAA, given your size, given your reserves, given your everything else. Now, I mentioned earlier that as the budget grows, our fixed rate GO bonds will shrink as a percentage, so that yellow and red lines would start to move higher, or said another way, those green lines would move lower as a percentage of the budget as the budget grows and those fixed payments don't. So while we're looking at a smidgen 4 years out, depending on the growth of our budget, there could be 2 smidgens or 3 smidgens, a little more room, whatever the technical term is. But this would maintain the AAA. If your question is, what if we go through the yellow or the red, then you start to get more of the danger zone. But as long as we stay within those guardrails, the agencies have already seen this and blessed us and said, this works, this is good. So if we stick to plans, we're in good shape.
And I'll also add, I know we talk a lot about the AAA standards, but the GFOA, which is the accounting guidelines for counties, they recommend a 25% or anywhere from 15 to 25% unassigned fund balance, and that's what they consider their rainy day. Now, Goochland does have a revenue stabilization fund. We keep a high amount in our assigned fund balance, but just to keep us safe, we want to have 25% of our general fund expenditures always available and unassigned to be used in any crisis situation. So, I mean, we are well above that every year because we keep a great high amount in reserves.
And that's because we're so small, the percentage of our budget needs to be very high.
Right.
GFOA, just like retail financial advisors, they recommend 2 months salary so you can look for a job and find one in 2 months. Well, 2 months out of 12, 2 over 12 is about 15% plus or minus 1%. And that's how they come up with, the GFOA says counties should have 2 months of revenues too, which is about 15% of your budget. So that's our reserves, but that's again, good practice as opposed to excellent practice.
Correct, yeah.
And it's for counties that are much bigger than us, so.
Yes, they can absorb.
Yeah, so, but anyway, they've seen everything that we have now, and they've blessed that and said, yes, this is, even though you're the smallest one in the country, get this, it works, and this is a AAA kind of way to manage the assets. So,
That chart just makes me wonder, what is the growth rate in the denominator of the green bars? What's the growth rate of your GF, of your general fund expenditures?
3%. I put that down below.
Oh, there it is, there it is,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I figured you
Should've
might
read
ask
the-
that
read the
because,
notes.
I mean, in our FY '24 budget, it's a lot higher than that. It's like 9.5%.
9.5,
But
so.
not every year. So, I mean, this does assume a lower growth rate.
So that's gonna ultimately give us room, if history's any guide, I mean, that's gonna
If
be.
you grow
Yes,
10% for the
exactly.
next 3 years, this is, you know,
Right.
right.
Yes.
And the other, and that's very conservative, and that's good.
It is.
7% interest is conservative, so this is conservative every which way you slice it.
We issued the 50 million out of the 96, which was over half the money at 2%.
Yep.
If we can do the other half at 2%, then this graph changes quite a bit. Now, we're probably not gonna get there, but that's okay. We'll get something else.
So, talking about the margins, just to make sure I'm clear, so this doesn't show the future CIP projects funding.
Yeah.
So what this is telling me, if I was to look at this, in 2027, we can only, to stay within our 10% target, we can only borrow about 0.7%.
Well, this graph assumes that we take out that $28 million loan in FY '26 and combine it with the courthouse.
Right.
So combining that new debt, bless you. So combining that new debt with our current debt, this is where we would fall, still below our policy. And in FY '27, you'd still have that little bit of wiggle room to borrow additional debt if need be.
But it doesn't count for things like the CTE program.
No, this is just
This is
borrowing.
Well,
just debt.
some of the money
This
went
is debt.
to- Yeah, yeah.
Is debt funding?
Well, it's really like, well, it's debt, but how much room do you have to borrow if that's one of the funding sources?
But-
Right, and
but
so
we've
I
done
see what
well-
you're saying,
We've
but,
done well not to cash fund a lot of them.
Exactly.
right,
We've done well by cash,
yes.
but that's,
Yeah, if you see in 20, 21, 22, the first three on the left, you see they were paying off the high school, middle school 20-year loan. It was done in 22, so it's 2022. Then that spike in 23 is the GES borrowing.
we did real good when I came on the board, is what you're saying.
And then we start paying, this boy really smart. And then, so then it ticks down a little bit, we're paying off the Motorola loan for, handsets, and the 911. So you pay off a little dribble, and then you see another spike with the courthouse borrowing.
Yep.
And then we say, okay, had enough to eat, we need to digest for a while. So then you see that we start paying off some of the debt each year, because there's principal paying out on the GO debt that we issued last year. We're paying that debt down each year, and we're paying down new debt each year. So then the idea would be to pay that down and have the county assets grow, the budget grow, until you have enough room to borrow for another school or another whatever major project. Well, once we paid it down to 2%, we said we got some room here to do something. So let's go to that GDS.
Awesome. Yeah, one more slide.
I do have one more, but we've already looked at it, so.
Oh, yay.
Okay,
Yep,
any further questions?
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all. I wish it was balanced, but we'll get there. We'll get
So
there.
I guess the last.
I guess the temporary is inflation.
Because to tie that one off, I mean, we talked about the 20 million. We've got 18 million left to borrow. On the,
You're talking about the school project.
yes, the schools. I mean, so effectively, we've got within just some wiggle, 1 or 2 million here and there each year.
Yes.
The funds have been identified.
Yes,
It's not irresponsible, we don't know where the money's coming from, it's just.
right.
This is.
We can always hope for more premium when we do borrow to put us above what we borrow.
So I'm gonna move into the citizen comment period. We have a couple citizens here, and this is our third agenda item, so anybody wishing to speak?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Sloan.
And Lisa, if you put the slides up, just kidding.
You get 30 seconds.
I want to address a couple of quick things. Number one, the safety study did not talk about some of the quick safety fixes. And if you look at Maidens Road, which was just two great yellow stripes put on the north side of Maidens Road, which should have been used on Fairground Road, where the passing lanes are, that would have solved some problems. And some of those safety fixes also, I'll suggest, involve the speed. If you look at Norfolk Southern, they collect data about every 13.9 miles. If you look at Delta, depending upon what flight they do, they collect data out every 4 milliseconds over, and there's 10,000 flights. It's not the FAA, it's made flight safer, it's the airlines. So what you have is a situation where data over time becomes very important. In today's world, which I'll re-emphasize, data collection is trivial. There's devices out there about the size of this and 4 inches deep that will give you a complete data history, including size of vehicle, speed of vehicle, and both lanes on roads. I suggest our transportation manager should be empowered to collect that type of data on roads and areas of interest, because how can you decide where developments are going to have a problem, especially with growth rates that are assumed out of a manual and then upgraded to 1.5%. You have to have a reality and basis, and that's really how, I'll say, engineers look at it, as opposed to somebody in finance who might run a bank into ground because of HTM to F, let's say the available for sale ratio, right? It's just ludicrous. The accident rates are very important because the FR 300 manual, which just talks about the reportability, those rates are important for Goochland County, even though some of them are not passed on. And some of those, what you'll find in the 300, FR 300 manual is the fact that not everything over 1,500 is reported because estimates are put forth, and then it's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 later. And there's other things not covered in it. And you also find out, talking to the sheriff's office, there are a number of reports that are never filed because of things that happen within the county and people that are involved in some of those accidents. Again, I'll go back to development. You're approving development that is happening all up and down this area, and none of this data is taken into account, even with the TIAs that are done. I'm sorry, it's just not accurate. But with that being said, I think there's also an opportunity, and I'll put this forth because it's been mentioned before, to pull the county out of VDOT and let the county handle the roads and even contract with Henrico County as necessary and save a lot of money and get things done on time. Mr. Chairman, Board, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, Mr. Sloan. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Yeah, I will. I want to say thanks. I mean, you made several references that this budget is going to be something next year's board will also have to deal with. And the due diligence that is being spent right now is going to help, because there will be board members who have never ridden this Bronco before. I mean, so it will be their first rodeo in a lot of ways. But I also brought to mind that all of these funds are coming from the taxpayer. And just in my sidewalk conversations, people are saying, my taxes are going up. The rate isn't, but my taxes are. And so I appreciate what I'll call fiscal responsibility that you're showing, in that it's not what can we spend this all on, but how can we spend this prudently. And I'm not even going to use the word spend, but I'm going to use the word invest. Because you are investing in our community, our county. And I just personally appreciate that very, very much. You guys are setting a high bar for whoever follows you on the board or stay on the board. And so thank you for that. But it is taxpayer money, and the rate's staying the same, but taxes are going up, and people are commenting on that. So I think you're aware, because if I'm getting those conversations, I can only imagine what your phone calls are like. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lau. Seeing no one else, I will adjourn this meeting to our Tuesday, April 4th Board of Supervisors meeting at 2 p.m. and on Tuesday, 18th, Fort Payne County budget. Please remember that we also have the District 1 Town Hall Thursday, March 23rd at 6:30, and the Districts 2 and 3, March 30th at 6:30. We're adjourned.